Maybe let's make, I don't know what should we make? Maybe like a steak sauce, maybe Korean inspired type thing, just to show what the live AI is like.
Yeah, let's try it. It's not something I've made before, so I could definitely use the help. Hey, Meta, start live AI.
Oh,
it's not something he's made before, but he does conveniently have all of the ingredients that he will need in front of him. So at Meta's annual conference, Meta Connect, Mark Zuckerberg's keynote presentation, where he attempted to demo his live AI, went quickly off the rails. You could say that it never was on the rails to begin with. Let's see how it went.
Like bulletproof, and he's
Hey, can you help me make a Korean-inspired steak sauce for my steak sandwich here?
Stage in front of everybody.
You can make a Korean-inspired steak sauce using soy sauce, sesame oil.
What do I do first? What do I do first?
Uh-oh. Oh,
you've already combined the base ingredients, so now grate a pear to add to the sauce.
That would be so embarrassing, dude. Ouch.
What do I do first?
What do I do first?
You've already combined the base ingredients, so now grate the pear and gently combine it with the base sauce.
All right, I think the Wi-Fi might be messed up. Sorry, back to you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah.
Whose Wi-Fi is messed up? He's still streaming. I don't get it. But wait, there's more. Here is Mark trying and failing to answer a video call with his smart glasses.
All right. So I think our call will be coming in any moment now.
You can't even get it to work during the demo.
Pause WhatsApp video call.
There we go. Uh-oh. Well, let's see what happened there.
I feel bad for Zuckerberg. So you got your boyfriend in Stardew Valley,
huh? Maybe Buzz can try calling me again.
He can't pick it up. At least they're being genuine.
I got a missed video call.
At least that's one thing.
Okay, so behind the scenes, I put together this package, this story for you guys, and I had to cut the video there because this goes on for an excruciating minute and a half. It's just like the longest minute and a half ever. First of all, Steve Jobs would never. And also, I don't know if you guys watched that show, Silicon Valley. I watched it a few times. I love that show, but it's a very stressful show to get through. And it always, this reminds me of when they went to TechCrunch Disrupt and they were like, we have to do this live demo and everything's on the line. And if we fail, we'll be embarrassed and we'll never get our funding. And then they pull it out of the park and it's a miracle and they do it. But it's very, very touch and go for a minute. And this is just like that moment, but it never got better. We never got to celebrate the end product there. And it's just like, it's kind of a sad, sad story of how far we have fallen. Because I remember, in the, around 2008-ish, 2010, 12, whenever the iPhone really became a thing. And I remember that keynote whenever Steve Jobs came out and he was like, here we have an iPod and here we have a camera and here we have a phone and all in one, here's an iPhone, right? And it was just like this monumental moment that we all experienced as a culture. And, however we feel about an iPhone these days, and not my favorite, but at the time it was like revolutionary. Like we've never seen anything like it. So Mark Zuckerberg, who has zero charisma, is trying to replicate that kind of a moment with this live AI demo, and it's not working because first of all, gross, he is gross, right? And then also no one is excited. Who is excited for this AI tech that they keep forcing on the American people? People are worried about their jobs, right? Whenever you hear AI, you're like, oh, it's coming for my job. That's what people think of. What do you think, Was?
I think what folks have to understand about the AI conversation right now, I know there's maximalists on both sides of there's people who think this is doomsday, the machines are going to kill us, they're going to take all our jobs, it's going to make life more horrible. And then there's people who are like, oh, this is going to be a utopia, cure cancer, blah, 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 all of that stuff. What you need to understand, even on the sort of more pessimistic side, if you're selling an idea of a future with no labor costs to investors on Wall Street, the biggest AI evangelists are invested in promising the most outlandish AI outcomes. Their personal wealth is connected to over-promising on what AI is going to do and actually achieve. Like, I think folks need to always remember that when Elon or Sam Altman or any of these other guys that are Zuckerberg, whoever they are, when they're talking about this, they are invested in Wall Street believing that they're going to change the world with this technology. I'm not so convinced myself. To be honest with you, I think all it's going to be is the same thing as social, same thing as Google. It might be a slightly more efficient way to sell you ads. That's it. If I'm going to give you an example, like let's just say I took, a screen capture of Yaz's picture, posted it on Instagram. One day they're going to I'm going to post the picture, and without my prompting, there's going to be a tag for where I could buy that rug, where I could get the cloth that's on that table, where I could buy that mirror, where I could buy that mic. That's it. That's the freaking innovation. More ways to sell us widgets that we can't afford because, salaries are stagnant and, the climate is going to crap and all this other stuff. But that, to my mind, to my eye, that's all we're headed towards. They're going to get better at selling us ads, guys.
I am so over ads, like that, to the point. I'm at the point where billboards are like very upsetting for me. I'm just like, God, I can't, like, it's so ugly. You're making my town ugly. It's just, it sucks, and like, yeah, you need to buy things. You need to know what's out there, but like, we really are just like, it's out of control, and like, I took up knitting just so I'm not scrolling on my phone all the time. So I have something else to occupy my hands with. And at the end of it, I have not spent all of my money. Instead, maybe I'll get a sweater out of it. I don't know how to knit yet. So far, I'm not that good at it or fast at it, but hopefully we'll get there. But it's just like, I said it earlier in the show, like I am like self-admittedly a Luddite, in a lot of ways. Like I reject technology as much as I can because like, obviously I work on the internet, like it's a part of life, right? Like I'm not like, I'm not trying to go live out in a field somewhere with some kind of, weird community. But, people are talking about getting like brain implants, smart glasses. Why? So I can just have ads popping up in front of my face all the time or like on my cornea. Like, I don't know what the future is, but all of it always comes back to advertising and I don't want it. I just want to opt out. And I don't know if that's an option, but I got my ad blockers up and, like it's just out of control. And I don't know if you guys have seen that show Upload. It was on Amazon Prime and it was very strange because even on the show, there's like ads everywhere in this like AI afterlife that is set in the future. But, it was ironic because it's on Amazon Prime and I can't get the ads off of the show as I'm watching the show about how ads have taken over the future. And it's all very dystopian to me.
Well, you don't have the ad-free Amazon Prime video?
I don't know. Like, I don't know what I have. And like, I'm not giving them any more money. Do the ads here. Like, I'm not doing it. So like, I'll probably just cancel it. Like it's like also all the streaming platforms and it's like, they're all terrible companies, like you're giving all your money to these terrible companies just so they can give you ads in return. And like whatever like good thing you get for it, for your money, it's just like, is it worth it? Like what am I actually paying for? And you know what? Maybe I'll just go knit a sweater instead. That's where I'm at.
I love it. Start a knitting crew in Houston.
I know.
Bring community. Bring the ladies together. And the men. Like, I need maybe some men might want to join too. I don't want to be gender specific. But yeah, start a knitting crew out there.
I you know what? I just might. So
be the change you want to see in the world. Yes.
I could be that,
What the
that's
fuck
another story,
am I listening to, dude?
Maybe.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets a Swix. Totally not true. But it does keep you updated on our live
fucking
shows.
video and quit sucking my watch time, dude. What are you doing? Shut the fuck up and move on.
Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
Last time on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World.
Salutations, listeners, and welcome back to Glitch Bottle, the podcast where we uncork the uncommon in magic, mysticism, and the generally misunderstood. I'm Alexander F., and today we are so elated to talk about Catholic theology and teaching regarding magic, the grimoires, exorcism, demons, and more. Jimmy is also a prolific author. One of my favorite books, by the way, listeners, check this out. We'll have links below, is Teaching with Authority, about what the church really says in its documents. But in addition to all of that, Jimmy Akin is the proprietor of an excellent podcast, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. What does the Catholic Church teach when it comes to magic? What are demons? What does Catholic teaching say leads to diabolic possession? As we've discussed on the show many times, magic and Catholicism have deep entwining historical roots or similar touch points going back literally 1,000 years and more. And as someone who grew up Catholic, I was an altar boy, went to a Catholic middle school, I want to know the Catholic theological thinking on esotericism, but also to challenge my own beliefs on the grimoires, on esoteric practice, and more. This chat with such an esteemed theologian will be a great thought starter for you as well. Jimmy Akin, thank you so much for taking the time and stopping on the Glitch Bottle podcast today.
Well, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here. You're listening to episode 383 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where we look at mysteries from the twin perspectives of faith and
what
reason.
What do I gotta do to get you to work
this episode, we're talking about...
That's not what I wanted. It's not what I wanted. I wanted here. I wanted here. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Sorry. Here we go. Boom. I wanted this. Then I wanted that. I go there. Go here. Maybe.
Lowe's knows when you
nope. Boom. Do. This. Let's do watch history. See what we got here. Down. Oh, I don't know what happened. Okay. So go back to here. Yeah. Here. No, what happened? What are you doing? Like, why are you scrolling? Why are you doing that? I'm not. Why are you doing that? Why? I don't know. What are you doing, dude? What? Oh my God! What are you doing, dude? I don't want you to do that. That's not. What are you doing? What are you doing, bro? That's not what I want. I don't want you to do that. I'm down here. No, I don't want you to do that. Please stop doing that. Oh my God, please stop doing that. No, I don't want you. I don't want that. I don't want to. Oh my gosh. Ooh. Gajuba. Wow, Zuckerberg, huh? What is going on, dude? This is weird. Meta. Like, look, it's still, what the? Meta? No, that's not what I want. Would you please do what I want? Could you please do what I want? Please. Please, could you please do what I want?
Leo
please,
XIV
please. I didn't hurt you. I didn't do it.
When Pope Leo XIV received 4 different major religious institutions at the Vatican,
where are we at here?
He encouraged them to read the needs of their time, just as their founders had previously observed their societies.
I vostri fondatori e fondatrici sono stati persone capaci di osservare, valutare, amare e poi partire anche a rischio di grandi sofferenze, anche a costo di rimetterci del proprio.
Okay, let it go. It wants attention. I can't
After
use
finishing
the
his speech, Pope Leo went into the crowd to meet many of the religious, and even received artwork from some of them. Later, Pope Leo XIV met with cardinals from the Mexican Episcopal Conference and continued to receive religious art. As a surprise to Pope Leo, the Mexican cardinals brought plates, ponchos, and art pieces with them, all depicting the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. One of the art pieces had a prayer and a blessing inscribed for Pope Leo on the back that read, Our Lady of Guadalupe blesses and protects Pope Leo XIV. Perhaps the most exciting gift of all was the Lady of Guadalupe poncho presented to Pope Leo. Our Lady of Guadalupe is the patroness of Mexico and the Americas,
even when it's
including Pope Leo's
electrons,
previous
dude,
home
just
country,
electrons,
Peru.
and you've got a chaos factor. What, shit's coming apart inside? Even the code's coming apart? What is happening? How is that possible that you have decay and chaos in such a controlled environment?
Some ladies said some bad words to you while you were at your dinner. Woo-hoo, whoop-de-doo, bruh. Like, get over it.
So is it, again, sheer happenstance that individuals show up at a restaurant where the president is trying to enjoy dinner in Washington, D.C., and accost him with vile words and vile anger, and meanwhile he's simply trying to have dinner? Does it mean it's just completely random that they showed up? Maybe, but to the extent that it's part of an organized effort to inflict harm and terror and damage to the United States, there's potential investigations there.
All right, that was Deputy Attorney General and Trump's former personal attorney, Todd Blanche, telling CNN anchor Caitlin Collins that the women publicly protesting the president in Washington, D.C. could be looking at RICO charges. Yes, RICO charges, and those are typically used against large organized crime units in cases where no one individual commits an illegal act, but collectively they all engage in illegal behavior. For example, RICO is what finally brought down the mob. The group that is being discussed is called Code Pink, and they went viral last week when they confronted the president, along with others like J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth and Stephen Miller, at a restaurant in Washington, D.C. And by confronted, I just mean that they were yelling things at him. Look at this.
Trump is the Hitler of our time! Free D.C.! Free Palestine! Trump is the Hitler of our time! Free D.C.! Free Palestine! Trump is the Hitler of our time! He's terrorizing communities in Turkey! Time to go! He's terrorizing communities all over the world! Free D.C.! Free Palestine! Trump is the Hitler of our time!
All right, so Trump, unwilling to accept any kind of criticism, is now weaponizing his DOJ, not the DOJ, but his DOJ against these activists for daring to speak out against him. And before we go on, let's hear more from the exchange between Collins and Blanche.
But were those women in the restaurant inflicting harm or terror or damage by protesting the president of the United States? I mean, they were just shouting, basically, in his vicinity.
I mean, repeat what you just said. I mean, honestly, so you're asking whether there's damage done by 4 individuals screaming and yelling at the president of our United States while he's trying to have dinner. That can't be a serious question. That cannot be a serious question. I mean, it's true that there's a difference between shouting and committing an assassination, which is what happened to Charlie.
Works well in a crowded area.
Well, it is nice that Todd Blanche can concede that yelling in a restaurant is not quite the same thing as assassinating someone, but Blanche did continue arguing that the right needs to get ahead of the dangerous, loud left.
Well, it depends. There's nothing wrong with peaceful protests, and nobody has ever said so. Of all the people in this country, President Trump knows exactly what it's like to have people protest against him. But what he's talking about, and what the administration is talking about, is organized efforts by individuals who are not present at the protests, but they're funding these protests, and they're not protests. They're inflicting damage and harm and actually assaulting officers. They're damaging vehicles, and that's the conduct that we're trying to stop.
I just love Caitlin Collins' face as she's listening to all of this. So Code Pink released a statement regarding their efforts, calling out the president for attempting to intimidate those who are speaking out against him and his administration. They said there is not some sort of big conspiracy around disruptions and confrontations like at Joe's. We practice nonviolent and non-threatening free speech. It is as simple as that. Anyone who believes in free speech should be appalled at this attempt to criminalize it. And this is all part of Republican efforts to actually suppress free speech in Charlie Kirk's name, especially. On Monday, Trump said that he was considering naming Antifa a terrorist organization, even though Antifa is hardly an organization at all. And he suggested that he would revoke tax-exempt status for liberal nonprofit groups and possibly explore criminal charges against groups or individuals that they deem to be targeting conservatives, whatever that even means, right? So we just watched a whole exchange between Caitlin Collins and Todd Blanche, where Todd Blanche was incredulous that Caitlin Collins was saying all they were doing was yelling at him, right? And he was trying to say this is violent behavior, or at least it leads to that. And he said, yeah, there's a difference between yelling at someone and assassinating someone. It's like, obviously, but why are we even having this conversation in the first place? I was laughing through that exchange because it was so ridiculous, but the reality is that these are things that they're actually implementing and following through on, and that is a very dangerous place for us to be in as a country. What are your thoughts, Wos?
Again, this is just par for the course in terms of the crackdown these people are trying to enact on those who they deem as their opposition. Everything that he said is patently ridiculous. This speech is protected under the Constitution. And more to the point, we live in some of the most undemocratic times of our existence. And what do I mean by that? To pretend that the will of the people is being expressed by the Trump regime and organization, I think is a joke. So we don't even get democracy in terms of the people's will being exercised by the folks that they duly elected. The idea that we can't even have, we disrupt your freaking little dinner. Okay? Like, you get to be the leader of the United States of America. Some ladies said some bad
Dude, who
words
is
to you
talking,
while
dude?
you
You
were
sound
at
like
your
a
dinner.
drunk at a bar.
Whoop-de-doo, bro. Like,
Whoop-de-doo,
the idea
brah?
that this guy has been
This
wounded
is
by
the
this.
level we're at?
He's not a nobody. He's
Whoop-de-doo,
not a private
brah?
citizen. He's the freaking president. Like, by definition, he works for those
Okay,
women
come on.
that were
I'm
screaming
sorry.
at
Too
him
much,
at
guys.
that restaurant. It's just
That's a
crazy
little too
that this
unprofessional.
chump lawyer would get up there and talk the way that he did.
Yeah, I can't.
Yeah, and
I
people like
can't.
Donald Trump, they
Love
don't
you,
think.
bro, but yeah, too much. Too childish, sorry.
Progressive's Up Payment program provides down payment assistance for first-generation home buyers. Because we believe everyone should have the access and opportunity to own a home.
All right, got to deal with the radio and the road, everything at the same time.
There's efforts to manipulate everything going on. And I think particularly in the Bitcoin space, people need to decide if it's going to be something that they want to let be co-opted by Wall Street, or if people in the Bitcoin space want to fight for it to be the tool it was originally marketed and sold to people as a tool for, sovereignty and financial freedom. Because if it ceases to become that and becomes like the chief means of asset storage for BlackRock and associated institutions for them to, usher in this new global financial governance system and financial financial system that they want to impose on everybody. I mean, what does that mean for the values that supposedly underpin Bitcoin in the first place? And, what are we doing here and what are we supporting? These questions need to be asked. And I think it's very important that, people that want to oppose the Wall Streetization, I guess, of Bitcoin sort of look at what can be done to allow its functionality as a currency for that to be able to scale and sort of avoid the efforts to sort of make it only a commodity in the hands of the same people on Wall Street that manipulate the prices of all other commodities for their benefit. I mean, do we really want to let Bitcoin become one of those heavily manipulated commodities that serve the Wall Street bankers, especially when Bitcoin was created as a way to hedge against irresponsible monetary policy and Wall Street corruption? I think we're at a stage where it's very important to ask ourselves what we're doing and to take a stand accordingly. The first time I really wrote meaningfully about Larry Fink was probably a few years ago in relations to the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, where Larry Fink is a principal. It's like a UN-sponsored organization that was co-founded by Mark Carney, former head of the Bank of England and later Bank of Canada, former Goldman Sachs. And also Mike Bloomberg is a big figure there, the former mayor of New York and a well-known billionaire who, started off at Salomon Brothers. So these are essentially bankers developing what amounts to a major component of UN-sponsored policy directly related to their climate change policies. And basically what GFANZ proposes is creating a new financial governance system, seizing what they call the new Bretton Woods moment, basically, recreating the global financial system and also reimagining the multilateral development banks like the World Bank, the IMF, et cetera, which came out of actual Bretton Woods, right? So they want to move all of that into a new paradigm. Larry Fink's been particularly vocal about that. And what GFANZ proposes specifically is merging the members of GFANZ with the multilateral development banks as a way to basically use the same debt slavery model that the MDBs have been criticized for using. But instead of using it to further U.S. empire or the dollar and things of that nature, it's instead the proposal is to use it to create better enabling environments in countries for the green investments of these large financial institutions and asset managers. So it's basically like perpetuating the same model of the MDBs, but having basically Wall Street run it under the guise that it's a planetary necessity and that we can't get to net zero without this, which frankly, if you look into the explanations for that, there's no way that's the case. But that's, how I first started writing about Larry Fink was because of his involvement in this relatively open plan to create a new financial system, which among other things doesn't just rest on the MDBs, but also on the development of global carbon markets, which comes up in this particular piece in a pretty meaningful way.
When you look at this, Whitney, do you consider this as BlackRock using their power to rent-seek off government policy, or do you think these people are just purely evil thieves?
Well, Larry Fink is someone who's obviously a member of the elite, and he's also a person who throughout his entire career has been pretty obsessed with risk management. So I think, whatever this new financial system is, it's that he is, part of this group proposing this, ultimately is about trying to enable BlackRock to continue its massive expansion to own, essentially everything with as little risk to them as possible, which obviously a lot of the stuff that Fink is pushing for as part of this broader system that the world's being pushed into under the guise of sustainable development that includes things like digital IDs and carbon markets and all of that, setting something up where it's will be very difficult to challenge BlackRock's financial prominence and dominance, really. And anything that Fink and others would view as a risk to their current trajectory, I guess they don't really have to worry about people or movements like that as they enter into and sort of impose upon us these new systems, which includes, some of these forms of digital control, like the CBDC and their private sector equivalents, for example, programmable, surveillable money, and tied into the digital ID thing. All of this, as is noted in the article, is meant to interface with global carbon markets and the multilateral development banks that Fink has been targeting in particular through GFANZ, and also BlackRock itself has been pretty focused on them. they're seeking the World Bank is developing climate wallet functionality and a lot of this other infrastructure on which global carbon markets would rely, and are also sort of attempting to become the main data storage for the digital ID system as well. So a lot of big moves are being made through these institutions for part of this new global financial governance system, as GFANS calls it.
But therefore, Whitney, did you raise your eyes recently when Elon Musk raised the idea of a carbon tax system? We spoke about in a previous interview.
Yeah, I wasn't really surprised because it's a position that Elon Musk has had for some time. That particular tweet you're referring to that was relatively recent is not the first time that he's sort of openly or publicly endorsed the idea of either a carbon tax or carbon markets. He's also endorsed a lot of other things that are supported more broadly by groups like the World Economic Forum, like UBI, for example, and some other policies as well. And, a lot of the success of Tesla, for example, has been related to sort of this ESG push in some ways, and in terms of the idea that we need to replace all fossil fuel consuming vehicles with electric vehicles. And Tesla's obviously the market leader in that, at least in the United States. So he definitely seems to be aligned in significant ways with some of these policies. So I'm not particularly surprised. I mean, in terms of what he says, his rhetoric, he's a lot more, he's very openly anti-woke, quote unquote. But a lot of his policies that he's promoted are a lot more in line with the woke crowd, the globalist people and all of that. Even if I think it's more of his opposition is found in sort of the culture war space, not so much on actual policy or economic policy in particular. I just want to sort of underscore the idea that there's a historical precedent, specifically in the US, for when they attempt to pitch a particular policy or create a particular entity. If it gets pushed back as being openly part of the government, they privatize it and then no one complains. So a good example of this that I refer to a lot is the post 9/11 Dragnet surveillance operation that was going to be housed in DARPA, which is part of the US military, called Total Information Awareness. And then this was privatized by Peter Thiel and some other people and turned into Palantir. DARPA's LifeLog project, in the same vein, was privatized and turned into Facebook, again with the involvement of Peter Thiel. People on the left and right alike were extremely opposed to these programs when they were being run by the military, by DARPA, but then you go and turn them into a private sector entity that does essentially the same thing, or really does do the same thing. And it's embraced or treated as private sector innovation and what have you. And people, think because of the rhetoric that, this is, everything's being handed back to the free market. But these companies, Palantir being an example, that was set up with state involvement, CIA involvement, right? So it's not really the free market, it's cronyism, it's crony capitalism, it's cartelism. And so with someone like Milei being like, yeah, I'm going to hand stuff off to the private sector, it's not like it's going to the Argentine private sector. It's going to foreign members of a global banking cartel that includes some of the biggest institutions on Wall Street that have a verifiable documented history of corruption, of basically, trying to think of the best way to say this, basically enslaving countries like Argentina through the debt slavery model. BlackRock has been a big part of that for Argentina. They hold a significant amount of Argentina's debt and are one of these so-called vulture capitalist firms, which operate sort of as this cartel model, that are responsible in large part for Argentina's problems. And then Milei openly meets with him and is like, yeah, come visit Argentina and let's discuss investment opportunities. And I think, according to Argentine media, is interested specifically in, buying up things that Milei plans to privatize, expanding the amount of essential Argentine infrastructure, which BlackRock already has significant stakes in.
And it was a cop car, dude. Oh my God, dude.
And also one of his Milei's top advisors,
just fucking crawl. Now you know why they do fast travel. They fucking fast travel through your shit, dude. It's fucking oh my God!
Stake in that power monopoly, and then he's given the central bank.
No, I can't fucking drive. Look, dude.
Duo that were in J.P. Morgan and then Deutsche Bank together, and were previously in the Mauricio.
It's literally using bumps in the road against me,
It's the same type of elite that Milei lampooned when he was on the campaign trail, but then he comes
Murphy just comes straight out of the box.
Friendly, and the same thing happened with Trump as well, where he campaigns against the neocons and the elite, and then he puts supports neocons like John Bolton in his office and gets very
That's how I live life. Yep. He's scared to go outside, dude.
Forum that's developing policies his administration.
You know, bad shit's gonna happen the minute you step out that door, dude.
There, Jamie Dimon's there. All these Wall Street titans.
So hobbits don't leave the Shire.
Are actually populous when they're governing. I mean, obviously
their
rhetoric is very different, but as Mark pointed out, there's a big mismatch.
They know what's out there waiting.
This bait and switch really is something that's been used in a documented way over the past 20 years, and people are unfortunately falling for it once again. But it's important to point out that I think Mark would agree that in the context we're talking about it here, we're not necessarily referring to like free market capitalism so much as the crony capitalism that dominates Wall Street and other beds, nexuses of power like that. Well, I think there's always certain ways people go about trying to justify why these leaders that have this particular mismatch we're pointing to here, why they do those things. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it does an extreme disservice to their campaign promises, which they end up not fulfilling in a meaningful way. So, if you take one of, for example, Trump's main campaign promises to drain the swamp, and he has like multiple swamp creatures running key aspects of his government. Sure, he maybe had to make deals. Art of the deal guy, right? He had to make deals for particular things to get through, but if you do too much of that, you don't end up delivering on anything. And so I'm sure people can justify that, but in this particular case, I think outcomes matter a lot more than rhetoric, just because of where things are. And I think ultimately about why this is happening has to do with them trying to get people to voluntarily sign on or onboard themselves to these systems they're developing. And so if it's not going to,
if that's not going to happen
successfully with left-leaning talking points, and they're going to try
put something out here. Put something out there almost every time when you turn right. There'll be something on your left.
About this system
Wait for you
people on the left or people on the right. There's a lot of things that have an extreme bipartisan consensus that are
sitting there waiting, and that one turns in front of you. Dude, it makes it fucking annoying as fuck as you're driving the city.
These guys ultimately agree over it. It's about the rhetoric that's being used to sell it, and it's important to keep in mind
too. Uncanny. Every time they slow down, every time they break realism, it hurts a little bit in your brain.
The themes of their annual meetings have been framed around rebuilding trust, and so they know which group does not trust them. The group that's pushing back against ESG and these other talking points and initiatives that have been coming out of the WEF for several years, and now in order to rebuild trust, they're putting different figures, different people, and different talking points, in front of people and seeing if they'll be more accepting of the ultimate game plan if it's framed in different terms that appeal more to their values and their sensibilities, and also framed as opposing, particular figures that they don't like or they don't trust. Yeah, I mean, I think part of it too is just like a failure for people to really understand the left-right paradigm and how it works. One of the hands creates the problem and the other hand comes in, the opposing side, then comes to power and is, on offering the solution to the problem the other hand created, but it's the same solution both sides agreed on the whole time, more often than not. I'll give you an example with Trump, the border wall. So that was like his big thing. I'm going to build a physical barrier. I'm going to build a physical wall. And then Democrats at that time said, no, our approach to border security is to build a smart wall built on sensors and autonomous drones and towers, surveillance towers and all this stuff. And then by the time Trump leaves his first term, that's his position too. The wall we're going to build is a smart wall. We're not doing the physical barrier anymore. That was essentially his position in January 2019. And he and the Democrats are, in the same spot on border security. But somehow he's still seen as like the president that like plans to do the wall, even though in terms of rhetoric, he abandoned that and was going with the Silicon Valley approach of this company. The company that's building that smart wall has a bipartisan consensus. It's deeply tied to the CIA and has a lot of very troubling affiliations, and is developing like drones. There's the drones on the border, and then there's the drones made by the same company that are being used in Ukraine right now to kill people without human oversight and stuff. It's not really a great solution, I think, but it's not what Trump's base necessarily wants either, because all this infrastructure is set up on the border now. This smart wall is there, but is it really working? I mean, obviously not, because of the extreme situation on the border currently. And the solution being proposed by the Senate is to fund even more of these smart wall towers. And, this ultimately ties into the same goals of Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Agenda of having freedom of movement restricted and controlled through biometric means, all tied up with with the whole digital ID thing and live facial recognition and all of this. That's what the smart wall implementation is really about, is having all ports of entry into the US being managed that way. And it's being rolled out simultaneously in places like the EU and Britain as well, and really throughout the world. And this is the particular way of selling it in the US. But both parties agree with it. And now, because of the frenzy over the border situation that's being fed, in a significant way by mainstream media, it's been bad for a long time, but the attention given to it has risen precipitously. And I think that's no mistake, because ultimately both parties agree that the solution is the smart wall. That doesn't work.
And after that, he started getting publicly attacked. Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin, the two biggest Zionist enforcers in the media, who are very close to Netanyahu, biggest forces lobbying Trump to wage war on Iran, went off on TPUSA, said we can't be having a Big Ten if it includes kooks. Laura Loomer, we all know who she is. She publicly attacked Charlie Kirk and said he basically had to step down. He was getting attacked in pro-Israel media. What we didn't know, which I learned, is in private, my pressure was even more intense. He was being bombarded with text messages. And at some point, Netanyahu personally called him and offered to basically fund his organization to new levels that he never even imagined, which meant, Zionist Israeli takeover, complete, recapture of TPUSA, an organization they basically helped create. And Charlie Kirk turned him down. And after Charlie Kirk was killed, we know Netanyahu wouldn't stop posting about it. Minutes after he was killed, when his body was still warm, Netanyahu was posting about him, interrupting his seven-front war in the Middle East and his global assassination spree, where he's trying to kill people even inside a U.S. ally in Qatar.
Can you remember any time that in the history of a political assassination that the leader of a foreign government has come out to deny that they were behind it?
I've never seen anything like that.
Right.
It was so Netanyahu has to ultimately deny that Israel was involved in an interview with Newsmax with Greta Van Susteren. Newsmax is another institution that Israel controls. Its CEO, Chris Ruddy, was just in Israel with Netanyahu, basically shining his shoes in public. So Netanyahu goes there and says, this is to accuse us of killing Charlie Kirk, having a role in this, is like a medieval blood libel and the Holocaust. Netanyahu says that probably leads some Gentiles to wonder if there was something to those blood libels. That sleazy and that blood links innocent Jews to the murderous campaign that Israel's carrying out. It's bad. It's actually bad for the Jews when he says that. But I've never seen anything like this. And I've never seen anything like what Netanyahu was doing relating to a tragedy or a crime in the United States since 9/11. Netanyahu blamed Muslims for Charlie Kirk's killing, explicitly on Fox News. He was trying to manipulate as much as he could, but it blew back on him because he's become a prime suspect. After 9/11, Netanyahu said in comments widely reported in Israeli media, you can look this up, he said 9/11 was good for Israel. And it's the same way that he saw Charlie Kirk's killing was good for Israel. He thought he actually probably thought a Muslim was responsible. And he thought he could blame the left and the Palestine Solidarity movement and get them shut down by the FBI. And so in a way, he was kind of thrilled by what had happened. And that fuels the speculation. But the real issue is, as we learned from a longtime friend of Charlie Kirk, who had spoken to him.
It's tough. It's tough.
About this.
And the aim, dude, his head is right in front of your aim. Puts it right in the way, dude.
Billionaire cutouts of Netanyahu, many of whom had funded his organization.
So his aim, it's terrible, dude. It's fucking terrible.
What would he be afraid of? I mean, obviously, you have an organization that's well-funded Did you get the feeling that he was only afraid of reputation damage.
Dude, that's fucked up. You shot him. Okay.
Losing money, or did his fears extend
Yeah, they both had guns.
his life?
Hey.
Well, that's what Harrison Smith, who's a personality at InfoWars, pro-Trump outlet, said, based on the source he spoke to. I don't know him. He said this in August.
No, dude, how come you're not remembering I want radio off? You gotta turn the radio off every time. Every time you get in the car, you gotta turn the radio off. It should be easier to turn that fucking off. To off. It should be easier just to turn it off. Gotta go through every station to get it to turn off.
So that, I didn't say that. I don't have
Look at it, dude. Look at it. Look at it, dude. Look what it did. Look.
When you go against the Israel line.
I'm just trying to drive down the street, dude. I'm literally just trying to drive down the street. Like, not on a mission, not doing anything, just trying to drive down a fucking street. Like this. This is what it feels like playing this game.
Yes. Yes, I mean, obviously he fears for his life, and I was told that he feared for his life before the 2 assassination attempts, one coming within a millimeter of striking his head.
I gotta take a break. I gotta take a break.
Not forget about that.
Can't hear my
just
YouTube
to clarify,
video.
He doesn't fear for his life because of Ireland.
I mean, I've been told, yes, that Israel is a major source of concern for Trump. I mean, think about it. What would happen?
This is our ally.
If he suspended
arms
if he suspended arms to a country that carries out assassinations all across the globe, that specializes in assassinations, that has an entire wing of its intelligence services that conducts assassinations, including with household goods like pagers, would you not be scared? So yes, Trump is scared. And what I learned from this source, who is a Trump insider, someone who talks to who talks to people in the Oval Office, people close to Trump, is that during one of Netanyahu's many visits to the U.S. this year, some figures in his retinue, Israeli agents, placed electronic devices on emergency response Secret Service vehicles. The Secret Service found them and they reported this to the White House. You know, these would be emergency response vehicles that would respond to an incident potentially involving the president. All right, some people watching this might be dismissing me as crazy right now, and I wasn't able to confirm this. I can't just call up the Secret Service and have them tell me that. But in 2019, 3 former high-ranking U.S. officials from the Trump administration told Politico that listening devices were found around the White House and at sensitive locations across Washington targeting President Trump. They wanted to listen to his calls and communications, and they were planted by Israel. And after that, he started getting publicly attacked. Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin, the 2 biggest Zionist enforcers in the media, who the 2 assassination attempts, one coming within a millimeter of striking his head. I mean, let's not forget about that.
But I mean, just to clarify, he doesn't fear for his life because of Ireland.
I mean, I've been told, yes, that Israel is a major source of concern for Trump. I mean, think about it. What would happen
this is
if
our
the president
ally.
if he suspended arms
confused.
to if he suspended arms to a country that carries out assassinations all across the globe, that specializes in assassinations, that has an entire wing of its intelligence services that conducts assassinations, including with household goods like pagers, would you not be scared? So yes, Trump is scared. And what I learned from this source, who is a Trump insider, someone who talks to who talks to people in the Oval Office, people close to Trump, is that during one of Netanyahu's many visits to the U.S. this year, some figures in his retinue, Israeli agents, placed electronic devices on emergency response Secret Service vehicles. The Secret Service found them and they reported this to the White House. You know, these would be emergency response vehicles that would respond to an incident potentially involving the president. All right, some people watching this might be dismissing me as crazy right now, and I wasn't able to confirm this. I can't just call up the Secret Service and have them tell me that. But in 2019, 3 former high-ranking U.S. officials from the Trump administration told Politico that listening devices were found around the White House and at sensitive locations across Washington targeting President Trump. They wanted to listen to his calls and communications, and they were planted by Israel.
Sometimes you gotta ignore it, dude.
Go look that up while I'm speaking right now. Boris Johnson, the former Israeli prime minister, wrote in his memoirs that Benjamin Netanyahu asked to use his bathroom, his personal toilet, and that British security found a listening device planted in his personal toilet immediately after Netanyahu left. So Netanyahu himself dropped a listening device in the British prime minister's toilet. Like, never let Netanyahu take a dump at your house.
Let me ask you a question. In your estimation, why do things like this not damage relations between the U.S. and Israel more, or the U.K. and Israel? You know, when an ally is found to be, now everybody spies on everybody, but when you are putting a listening device in the prime minister's bathroom, or you're putting, reportedly putting tracking devices on Secret Service emergency response vehicles, where is the fallout from that? Is there any? Is there any diplomatic fallout from that?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, think of all the things Israel does. Israel just is seeking to drag the U.S. into an all-out war with Iran. Where's the fallout from that? The fallout is among the people. It's among the young people who watch your show, who follow social media, who don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. Like, they're paying attention, and they have almost no power in this country on this issue because of Israel's ethno-supremacist bribery network known as AIPAC, which controls Congress with a hammerlock.
Where's my sniper? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I gotta go get it? No! Oh no! Don't despawn! Don't despawn! Oh, this guy's trying to take it too. Oh, you... Yeah? Where's my fucking sniper? There it is. Oh, God. There it is. Oh, you're gonna try to get aggressive with a 2-time, huh? This guy's gonna try to get aggressive with a 2-time. Look at him. Dude, where is he? Doc, can we get a screenshot? What do you want a screenshot of, huh? Disappointment, excitement, disdain, psychoticness? You're gonna get it all. The name is Dr. Disrespect. You see, there's no hesitation when a chubby-cheeked, pigeon-toed wannabe gamer pulls up in front of the 2-time, wanting to get a glimpse of the best to ever do it. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, one by one, they will be taken down today. And I love these obstacles because we go right through them. Little bumps, little speed bumps. Boop, boop. Excuse me, fat boy. The upgrades, oh God, so delicious, isn't it? I'm delicious. I'm incredible. I'm handsome. I'm gorgeous. I'm shredded. But enough about me. Who am I kidding? It's going to be all about me today. This ain't a joke! Oh. Don't it give you goosebumps? Doesn't it give you goosebumps? Yeah, the Champions Club locker room is good, but I'm talking about me. Gimme, gimme, gimme. I've got one game, champs. I'm not wasting any time today.
Hey, Doc, this doesn't look like the finals. I said it. Even though we're in the f***ing arcade, where I get one game.
I guess that's 2 hit shots right there. See it. Nickname field. I'm gonna go get that gear though, because I know he. Ooh, I saw you. You know what? I'm gonna just get out right here and just go like this. Ooh.
Got one a little weak. I got your one hit guy. Nice. I'm gonna fire grenade this guy's body.
Fucking melee.
Okay, obviously I have no
Never enough! Alright, there's a couple of things that are just starting to fucking piss me off!
Oh, you can do some big...
How come there's no footsteps? None! It's never enough! It's never enough!
That guy ate. Dude, that gun is ass. Try that.
How does he not die? How? That's the audio I get? Yeah, we played the finals. I snaked around. I dematerialized this. I dematerialized the walls, and we couldn't get the 5 wins! Now we're back to this shit game, man! Oh, God. Gimme! Okay, come on!
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are heading into another Warzone match featuring the Shoddy Boys. Bobby Buff, Rallied, and the 2-time back-to-back 1993-94 blockbuster video game champion, 6'8" gaming green. You're talking 2 years in a row. No, it wasn't 1 year and 10 years later. No, he did it back-to-back. Yes, I'm talking about Dr. Disrespect. And ladies and gentlemen, can they win?
There's no way there's a Claymore on this helicopter, right? Come on out.
Have you tried the flavor of the month, the burger shot yet?
And so to finish and it boosts your confidence. This is my comeback. Start yours today at purdueglobal.edu.
Overextended on you. That's out in the open. One shot on your right.
Nice.
Well, I'm just delighted to be here. The first word I got of this a few months ago, I said, that's a marvelous idea to talk about the Nicene Creed, the year of its anniversary, as a way of, establishing a deeper dialogue between the East and West. Your Eminence, thank you for your friendship over the years. We met a few years ago, and we had dinner here at Victoria's in Rochester. And he gave me a beautiful gift of an icon, which I have right in front of me in my chapel when I pray my holy hour every morning. So I think of him when I pray every morning. So thank you, Your Eminence, for your hospitality and for this chance to address this marvelous topic in this marvelous place. Let me begin with a little anecdote. This goes back many years when I was working in the parish. And a gentleman who was a well-respected member of our parish community, I think he was a teacher in our catechetical program, came up to me and said, Father, I got a question for you. I always wondered, the creed we recite every Sunday, and we say, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made. Does that mean anything? Yes. And I said, yes, it means everything. But it's emblematic in a way, I think, that this central statement of our Christian faith that we celebrate the anniversary of this year needs to be reiterated. It needs to be understood more profoundly, because it is indeed the standing or falling point of Christianity. This is where, in some ways, the great battle was fought in the year 325. And that's why we rehearse the victory every Sunday by saying precisely those words. So it's very important for us, both East and West, for all Christians, to revisit it. Reflect first on the fact that Nicaea took place in the year 325. Long time ago, yes, but also, 300 years after the dying and rising of the Lord. So the Christian community had been thinking a lot for 3 centuries about the central mystery. Namely, who is Jesus? So clearly from the biblical witness that Jesus is a human figure, no one really doubts that. The Docetus maybe did. But he's also someone who consistently spoke and acted in the very person of God. My son, your sins are forgiven. Well, only God can forgive sins, the bystanders say. That's the point. You've heard it said in the Torah, but I say, breathtaking for a first century Jew. You've heard it said in the Torah, that's God's own word, but I say, claiming authority over the Torah. Who could do that but God himself? Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Well, who could say that? No merely human figure. Unless you love me more than your mother and father, more than your very life, you're not worthy of me. Well, no merely human figure could say that. So what's bequeathed to the early Christian tradition is this dilemma, this problem. How is he both human and divine? Well, go back to figures like Irenaeus of Lyon, Tertullian, Justin the Martyr, Origen, many others. They were trying to sort through this problem. Well, things come to a kind of head in 325, and that's because of this figure called Arius of Alexandria. Now, who was Arius? Arius was a priest of Alexandria, and like a lot of people in that city at that time, was given to highly abstract speculation. In our culture, here we are near the Mayo Clinic, in our culture we reverence the physical sciences. Well, back in those days, it wasn't so much the physical scientists, but the philosophers and theologians they referenced. So Arius comes of age in this very heady milieu of philosophical and theological reflection. What's he interested in? Our great question. Who is Jesus?
If the cops ask,
and
you
Arius
didn't get it here,
proposes
okay?
his famous answer. And for its time, it was a very clever answer indeed. Arius said, look, we have to hang on to the sovereignty and unicity of God. So this Logos who becomes flesh in Jesus can't really be God in the full sense. But the Logos is the highest creature of God. The highest creature that's come forth from God is the Logos. And then all of his other creatures are underneath the Logos. So this very high, quasi-divine figure becomes flesh. Now, what does flesh mean? Well, Arius thought it's pretty awkward to say that the Logos is competing with the human mind and soul. So the human mind and soul are supplanted by the Logos. So Jesus is quasi-divine, not really divine, and also quasi-human, not fully human. He's a hybrid, he's a mix of the two. Might seem peculiar to us, but keep in mind the mythological framework that wasn't totally alien to that time and place. Think of someone like Hercules or Achilles, demigod, demi-human. Well, that's Arius' proposal. Right? Clever, and it solves some problems theologically. In some ways, the dilemma goes away. They say, too, that Arius was very attractive, charismatic, a very good speaker, and even a singer and songwriter. To make him sound like Elton John. But he would sing, he would compose songs, and if you want to be a popular figure, it's great to have a catchphrase. He had a catchphrase.
Trying to move it.
There was a time when he was not. The key in question is the Logos. It's his way of saying the Logos is very high, very important figure, but not divine. There was never a time when God was not, but there was a time when the Logos was not. And Arius put that phrase into songs and into his sermons and into his public speeches. Well, he becomes a popular figure and a divisive figure. Some people loved his solution to it. Others said, no, you're betraying the heart of the Christian faith. So, there were conversations, arguments, local councils held to answer Arius. But his views kept spreading outside of Alexandria to the wider Eastern Mediterranean world. Now, what's happening at the same time geopolitically? The rise of Constantine. Right? So the Roman Empire split kind of in two. There were Caesars of the west and of the east. Constantine consolidates power. He wants to be emperor of the United Roman Empire, has his new capital city in Constantinople, the city of Constantine, and his newly found Christian faith. He wants to be the glue that holds the empire together. What did he notice? Just when I want Christianity to be the glue that unites us, these Christians are fighting with each other about who Jesus is. So Constantine says, time for a council. Time for a gathering of bishops so that we can determine this Arian problem. Where did he gather them? Well, the little town of Nicaea, about 50 miles southeast of Constantinople. He wanted these bishops close to him so we could him. He sent his own court theologian, a man named Physius, to watch over things. And so the Council of Nicaea takes place in the summer of 325, so exactly 1,700 years ago. It was a gathering of about 200 bishops, and we have the list of who was there. There's a legend, that Santa Claus was there, St. Nicholas, who indeed was a bishop at that time in a place called Myra, not that far from there, but he's not listed in the official list, so it's probably a legend. But the further story, that St. Nicholas was there and punched Arius in the nose. It's a great story. I wish it were true. Who knows? Maybe it was. But it is true that Arius himself came to Nicaea to argue his position. And throughout the summer of 325, they went back and forth. But then the Council Fathers took this decision, which we celebrate this day, we repeat it to this day, because we intuited it is the standing or falling point of Christianity. And let me now just go to some of these famous words. And I think they might take on a deeper meaning as we say them now. What do we hear about the Logos from the Nicene Creed? That he was born of the Father before all ages. What's that? Wrong, Arius. You said there was a time when he was not. No, he was born of the Father before all ages. There never was a time when he was not. He shares fully in the divinity of the Father. Now, in case you missed it, he's God from God, light from light, true God from true God. Boom, 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 if you want, right? Don't miss it, Arius. You're wrong. The one who comes forth from the Father, this Logos, is fully divine, shares in the divinity of the Father. And then we find this famous term. It says, God from God, light from light, true God. Begotten, not made. He's begotten, not made. I think of my friend from years ago saying, Father, does that mean anything? Begotten, not made. Well, it means a lot. In the Greek, genetos with two n's, two n's, as opposed to genetos with one. That's begotten as opposed to made. Now, what's the difference? Let me do just a little parenthesis here. At Nicaea, there was the Bishop of Alexandria. His name, of course, was Alexander of Alexandria was there. With him was a young man, not an official member of the synod, but he was there as an assistant. His name was Athanasius. We know him as Saint Athanasius. He was a deacon assisting Alexander of Alexandria. And he was watching things very carefully at Nicaea. And it became for him the decisive moment. He spent the rest of his life, because he took Alexander's place as bishop when he died. He spent the rest of his life defending Nicaea. At a time when, trust me, after Nicaea, lots of people continued holding Arius' position. And Athanasius kept saying, no, kept fighting. He writes a great text against the Arians, in which he lays out the distinction between begetting and making. Now here it is. What's begotten comes from another. Okay. We say the Son comes from the Father. What's made comes from another. So we've all come forth from God, right? So in that sense, begetting and making are the same. What's the difference? What's begotten entirely participates in that from which it comes forth. What's made participates only to a degree. So, for example, do we all reflect something of God's being? Yeah. We participate to some degree in the to-be of God, but we don't perfectly participate. Otherwise, we'd all be God, right? But the Son, who comes forth from the Father, perfectly participates in the being of the Father. Next distinction, what's begotten comes forth automatically, ineluctably, inevitably. What's made comes forth as a result of the enact of the will. Does God have to create us? No. We're created because God chose to. He didn't have to, but He chose to. But the Son is not created. The Son comes forth automatically by a metaphysical necessity from the Father. That, Athanasius explains, is the difference between begetting and making. So the Son, begotten, not made. Now, dare I speak of St. Augustine in this holy Eastern place here? Augustine's feast day is tomorrow in the Western Church. Augustine, you say, well, give me an example of this. What's something that's begotten that I can relate to? Augustine's famous example is the way the mind can utterly know itself. The mind can form an image of itself. Not splitting
Good morning, baby girl.
But the inner word, he says, that comes forth from the mind participates perfectly in the being of the mind. Says Augustine, that's a model for the Trinitarian procession of the Son from the Father. So, but going back to Nicaea, that's the hinge distinction. The Son is begotten, not made. So he fully participates. And now this comes to our famous word. I think that's in the title of my talk for tonight. So he's God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, and then homoousios, with the Father. Now, we used to, when I was a kid, it was translated as one in being with the Father. Now we say consubstantial with the Father. In many ways, it's the central word of the Nicene Creed. It was made up for the occasion by Hosius, by the way, that theologian that Constantine brought. He proposed that kind of neologism. Ousia means substance in Greek. Homo means the same. He's of the same substance as the Father. He's one in being with the Father. Consubstantial with the Father. Not two separate beings, right? Two separate beings that'd be different substances. But the Son, though distinct from the Father, begotten of the Father, is consubstantial with the Father. The Son is fully divine. You see how in these little phrases, it's again and again hitting at areas. There was a time when he was not. He's not really God. He's just a high creature. No, 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 no. Again and again. And then it's summed up in a way by that word. Homoousios. One in being with the Father. You want to hear, this is a little bit of theological trivia, but there's a famous battle in theology over literally one iota. So after Nicaea, this debate continues, right? And so the homoousians were those that hung on to the Nicene doctrine. There were others like Arius that just said, no, he's not divine at all. But then there was a middle ground, the homoiousians. Homoi means of similar substance. Homoousios, same substance. So some say, Arius is not right, but I'm not going to go all the way to this one in being. That makes the Son and Father seem to be completely non-distinct. So let's compromise and say they're of like substance. The battle literally over one iota. This is the period after Nicaea, during the bulk of the 4th century, as the church is trying to sift its way through this language. Let me just bring this now a little bit to our own time. Go back to the 19th century. There was a great figure called Johann Adam Müller. He's from Tübingen in Germany. He began his career very much as a liberal Christian theologian. He was following Friedrich Schleiermacher, who was the founder of modern liberal Protestantism. Schleiermacher had a very low Christology. He saw Jesus as the man with the perfect God consciousness. So we all have God consciousness to some degree. We wouldn't be in this room if we didn't. And then saints have a really high God consciousness. And then Jesus is the man who had a perfect understanding of God. And that was Schleiermacher's Christology. Do you see it echoed in the 19th century? Do you see it echoed very clearly in the 20th century? Yeah, a lot of the people, frankly, that I read going through the seminary were Schleiermacherians. They would have seen Jesus as a kind of a high saint, someone with a very high consciousness. Well, Johann Adam Müller, as a young man, takes in Schleiermacher, believes in it, writes about it, and then has a conversion. And he realizes, no. If that's all Jesus is, he doesn't save us. Now, in saying that, Johann Adam Müller, 19th century, echoes Athanasius from the 4th century. So Athanasius, contra mundum, they always call him, he's against the world. He's fighting against the Arians. But Athanasius made that same argument. If Jesus is not truly human, then I'm not saved. Right? But if he's not truly divine, I'm not saved. Because look, we're all great, but we're all in the same boat, as Chesterton said, and we're all seasick. We're all sinners in this room. We're all spiritual failures in this room. If I look to some merely human figure, I don't care how great he is, how great his God consciousness is, he's not going to save me. Athanasius and Johann Adam Müller both came to the same conclusion. Only if he is God from God, light from light, true God from true God, can he save me. This led Mueller to write a text toward the end of, he lived only a short time, to about 42, but toward the end of his career called Athanasius der Große in his German. Athanasius the Great. He realized that's the voice that we need. John Henry Newman, one of my great intellectual heroes, just named a doctor of the church right a few weeks ago. Newman comes back from Rome as a young man. He goes there and he realizes there needs to be a reform of the Anglican Church. And he says, what's needed is a new Athanasius. Right. Paul Tillich, 20th century Protestant theologian, born and raised in Germany, began teaching there, but then came to our country later in his life. And he referred to Nicaea as the Gettysburg of Christianity. It was the battle. It was the fight. If we had lost that one, we would have lost the war. Dead right, seems to me. If we had lost Nicaea, Christianity would have devolved into maybe a sect of Judaism or an old mythology or some new form of Neoplatonism. It would have ceased being Christianity. You want some lead? And I think, everybody, that's why it's important for us to gather here and to celebrate this great anniversary. Because we're lost in this room. We're sinners in this room. We're all longing for salvation. We cling to each other. That is not enough. If we really want to be saved, we have to turn to the one who is God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, consubstantial with the Father. Only in him do we find salvation. God bless you all. Thanks for listening.
This all you giving me? What you say to me?
Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
Last time on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World.
Salutations, listeners, and welcome back to Glitch Bottle, the podcast where we uncork the uncommon in magic, mysticism, and the generally misunderstood. I'm Alexander F., and today we are so elated to talk about Catholic theology and teaching regarding magic, the grimoires, exorcism, demons, and more. Jimmy is also a prolific author. One of my favorite books, by the way, listeners, check this out. We'll have links below, is Teaching with Authority, about what the church really says in its documents. But in addition to all of that, Jimmy Akin is the proprietor of an excellent podcast, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. What does the Catholic Church teach when it comes to magic? What are demons? What does Catholic teaching say leads to diabolic possession? As we've discussed on the show many times, magic and Catholicism have deep entwining historical roots or similar touch points going back literally 1,000 years and more. And as someone who grew up Catholic, I was an altar boy, I went to a Catholic middle school, I want to know the Catholic theological thinking on esotericism, but also to challenge my own beliefs on the grimoires, on esoteric practice, and more. This chat with such an esteemed theologian will be a great thought starter for you as well. Jimmy Akin, thank you so much for taking the time and stopping on the Glitch Bottle podcast today.
Well, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here.
You're listening to episode 383 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where we look at mysteries from the twin perspectives of faith and reason. In this episode, we're talking about grimoires, the occult, and other mysterious subjects. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today is Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, be sure to stick around to the end of the episode. We'll have your feedback on our recent episode on the Hell House of Martinez. But first, last week we heard part one of an interview which Jimmy did on a podcast called Glitch Bottle. It's devoted to ceremonial magic as opposed to stage magic. And the ceremonial magicians who listen had lots of questions for Jimmy and how the Catholic faith understands magic. But they put yet more questions to Jimmy. So what did the magicians want to know this time? How did Jimmy respond? And what would a Catholic perspective on these questions be? That's what we'll be talking about on this episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. So, Jimmy, what should we know before listening to part two of your interview?
Well, this was a very interesting interview for me to do, and some of the topics that you heard the host of Glitch Bottle, Alexander Eth, mention in the opening are actually topics that we covered the basics of last week, so you can listen to those episodes for more information. Also, as we mentioned then, I was pleased to be able to address the audience of Glitch Bottle, and I want it to be of as much help as I can to the audience, so I didn't want to just come on and be hostile. I wanted to resist stereotypes that some in the audience might have had come to mind, because you don't generally help people by being hostile. And so I wanted to show the audience that I'm just an ordinary guy, that I've got a sense of humor, that I'm interested in a bunch of subjects, not just Catholicism, and that I try to think through subjects in a fair and open-minded way, while at the same time applying Catholic principles. I also mentioned a name last week that you'll be hearing again this week. You'll hear both the host of Glitch Bottle, Alexander Eth, and me make some references to Dr. Justin Sledge. Justin's a Jewish scholar of the esoteric who runs a YouTube channel called Esoterica, and I've interviewed him here on Mysterious World before about the Kabbalah. That's in episodes 218 and 219 if you want to check them out. We also mentioned grimoires some more, and as I explained last time, the term grimoire has been around in English since the mid-1800s. It comes from the French word grammaire, which means grammar or incantation. So a grimoire is a book of incantations. In other words, it's a book of rituals or spells used in ceremonial magic. Although the term grimoire comes from the mid-1800s, we have grimoires that date back to the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and they were sometimes used by Catholic priests and other clergy, which leads to the subject that's been called the clerical necromantic underworld, which comes up in our discussion, so you'll be hearing about that. Finally, just at the end of last week's episode, Alex was asking me a question that involved having an open mind, and you'll hear him follow up on that question at the beginning of this part of the interview.
Okay, then let's listen to part 2 of your interview with Glitch Bottle. But first, we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make this show possible, including Donald M., Sandra M., Haley H., Tess W., and Cecilia W. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World and all the shows at StarQuest. More than 90% of our financial support comes from individual donors like you, so you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is also brought to you by DeliverContacts.com, offering top brand contact lenses at always low prices with free delivery. Visit DeliverContacts.com. And by Father Robert Spitzer and the Magis Center's new Critical Catholic Cosmology program. Join a community of adults and educators seeking to grapple with the truth claims of science, philosophy, and the Bible in a classroom environment, with special appearances by Father Spitzer. Ground your faith in evidence with a critical method that integrates heart and mind. Earn 6 graduate credits over 2 semesters at a third of the cost of most graduate programs. Online or in person in the Boston area on Tuesdays beginning October 7th. Go to magiscenter.com/institute. magiscenter.com/institute, or search Critical Catholic Cosmology to register today.
And Jimmy, to that point, especially about keeping an open mind, it's been one of the themes of this conversation, seeing things in different ways, exploring the nuance while showing fidelity, of course, to both faith and reason. We do have another listener question for you from patron Richard Irving, and Richard is asking and saying, quote, "Hi, Mr. Akin. Wow, this is the podcast I always wanted to hear, as I'm a fan of Jimmy's excellent and mysterious work, and I love researching Western esotericism. My question," Richard says, Jimmy, is on the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 12, verses 24 through 28, where the Pharisees said, quote, "This man does meaning Jesus, thank you, does not cast out demons except by Beelzebub, the ruler of the demons," end quote. And Jesus responds, quote, "And if I cast out demons by Beelzebub, by whom do your sons cast them out, end quote. So, Richard says, my question, Jimmy, is twofold. Number one, were there Jewish exorcists operating at the time of Jesus? And number two, was it common to use a higher-ranking demon, like Beelzebub, to successfully manipulate an infernal hierarchical command structure to force lower demons out? Thank you.
Okay, so in regard to the first question, yes, there were Jewish exorcists operating in this time period. We know about them both from elsewhere in the New Testament. Now, earlier I mentioned, Jesus gave the 12 the authority to cast out demons, but then they found someone else who was casting them out, and in Jesus' name. And well, okay, that person was probably Jewish, but he was also using Jesus' name to do it. So what we're really looking for here is, were there Jews who cast out demons without invoking Jesus' name? And the answer is yes. We know about them from multiple sources. One source is actually elsewhere in the New Testament. In the book of Acts, there is a set of sons who are of a Jewish high priest named Sceva, who
God dang it, dude,
who cast
I
out
can't.
demons too. And they're working on this demoniac, and apparently they're all there together.
I can't see,
So this would
dude.
be
I
a
can't
really
see
intense
him, dude. I
exorcism.
can't
You got these
freaking
seven
see him,
sons who are
dude.
all exorcists, apparently,
It's like
doing
dark.
this.
He's behind a fence,
and
and
then
then a dude jumps up behind me.
Actually, use the
Okay.
name of Jesus. They mentioned that we cast you out in the name of Jesus, who Paul preaches, and the demon says, "Well,
I can't
know
see
who,
him,
I
dude.
know who Jesus is, and I've heard of Paul,
Go
but
around, get her
who
best.
the heck
Calm
are
down
you?"
for
And he
once.
attacks them and drives them out into the street, apparently unclothed. So it's a bit embarrassing. But they also still kind of use the name of Jesus, but it's indicated in this text they didn't always do that. So sometimes they would use God just as their reference without mentioning Jesus specifically. We also know about such exorcists from the Jewish historian Josephus, who lived later on in the 1st century. And he talks about Jewish exorcistic practice and so forth. And he has an additional mode of exorcism.
I can't. Oh
in
my God.
in episode 188 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, about why it's not always demons.
You're gonna
and
run
what
right
are
in
some
front of me,
the
dude.
dangers of assuming it is demons. I start that episode with a series of 6 or 7 stories, all news stories.
I can't move the cursor without it
before I
jumping, dude.
recorded it. About instances where people were assumed to be demonically possessed and got killed in at-home exorcisms. Like, oh, my 2-year-old daughter is throwing timber.
Look, I can't move it without it jumping, dude.
So let's hold her head under scalding hot water
Look,
to drive the demon
and then
out.
it reloaded on me. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, not a good practice. And that's specifically
Yeah, I
why
can't, dude. It
use
moves
6 or
so
7
far,
stories,
dude.
all from the
And I'm
previous
just
2
the
years.
anxiety.
to make the
I'm
point.
trying to use
If you
fine
just
motor
assume it's
skills, and it's
demons
just the
without good evidence,
anxiety. Oh my
like just because a
God!
2-year-old
Inside my
is throwing
body is just.
tantrums, it can lead to serious,
God, dude.
serious
Oh,
problems. So this
fuck.
is
It
not an
is. It's
assumption
like
we
a
want to
fucking
make.
anxiety simulator.
And
Okay.
by the way,
No,
at-home
I was
exorcisms are
trying
not
to
the way
move
to
it,
go.
dude, and then it was putting my guys right in front of me.
Nobody drowns in scalding hot water in a Catholic
Just constant,
exorcism.
constant,
That is
Murphy,
not one
Murphy,
of the
constant.
that is not one of
Dilemma,
the
dilemma,
procedures that's
dilemma,
provided
dilemma.
for in the manual.
And just, fine motor skills. And
Some
I'm not
exorcists
tense
have
like
used
this, and I'm just,
physical discomfort
fuck, man.
to try
Oh,
in various world
come on,
religions to
dude.
try
Just
to
stop,
dislodge
just stop.
the demon.
For
And it
Christ's
kinda
sake,
makes
just
sense. If
stop
you've
for a
got
minute.
Got a harmful spirit in someone.
Come on, man.
You know, you could
Look,
make it
get
uncomfortable
off
for
me.
them
Get
to
off
stay.
me, please. Please get off me. Please get off me.
You know, that
Come on,
actually
come on.
goes
Let me get
along
out of here. Let
with
me
my
out of the
theory
matrix.
holiness overload.
What do they call that?
Making it uncomfortable for them.
Give me
to
an
stay
exit. I need an
because,
exit.
this is uncomfortable.
Give
for
me an
them.
exit, please.
But it's not
I can't take
uncomfortable
any more.
for
Give me an
a person
exit.
who's not a demon.
My nerves
And
are
so it
shot.
doesn't injure
My
the
nerves
person to
shot.
expose
I'm having
them
an
to
anxiety
holy
attack.
prayers and things
Let me
like that.
fucking out of here.
So
Give me
unless
an
you're doing
exit,
something
Mr.
that's not
Wizard.
provided for,
Come on.
it's not going to hurt the person, but it will
Tech
make
support.
the demon uncomfortable.
Tech
and hopefully
support.
enough
I'm
to leave.
having an anxiety
Well,
attack.
okay,
Help.
so other
Help.
religions, though, don't
Help.
have the
Tech
constraints
support.
that the Catholic
Help
Church
me. Help me.
does about don't hurt the demoniac.
No, dude, seriously. It's
In
just
fact,
something about
many
being
of
tensed
these
up like
were,
that and trying to
I hate
move.
to say it, but they were done by folks in
I'm
the
under a
Protestant community
stressful
who don't have
situation and
established
trying
rituals
to
for this,
move my
and they're just kind of
hand.
making it up on their own because they're
Whew, it's
desperate
like being
and,
at work
dealing with
and
this
painting
problem.
something and
And
your
they're
boss
trying
is
what
right over your
might
shoulder
work.
just
Well,
fucking
according to
yelling at
Josephus,
you.
some Jewish exorcists did use a kind of discomfort-based exorcism,
Oh,
where
God,
they would
dude.
take,
Wow.
and he cites a particular
Gotta
Jewish
go.
exorcist
Gotta go.
who, if I recall correctly, he had
Break
actually
time.
seen
Break
this
time.
exorcist operate, but he had a kind of plant matter that smelled really bad. And he had it in a ring, and he would expose the demoniac's nose to this evil smelling plant matter to try to drive the demon out. And so there's another model for how you physical discomfort, for how exorcism could work. And in this case, he also had it's been a while since I looked up this passage, but he also had a test for the demon to show that it had left the person. If I recall correctly, the test was he's got like a little basin of water or something, and the demon's supposed to knock that over when it leaves. And so he had both a way to get rid of the demon, and he had a test to show that the demon had left. And a lot of this in the Jewish community was linked to the figure of Solomon. Who has this reputation as, the wisest king of Israel. And so, well, if he's wise about stuff, he ought to know about how to get rid of a demon. And so Solomonic magic then became a subject that was explored in the last couple of millennia. We don't have any biblical evidence that Solomon really did anything with regard to demons, although maybe he did. I certainly couldn't rule it out. Like I said, every religion has ways of dealing with harmful spirits, and if you got someone with a reputation for wisdom, he might have looked into this area. I just don't have historical proof that he had anything to do with demons, but the Solomonic magical tradition is a notable tradition. In any event, and we also read about Jewish exorcists in other contexts, although it becomes less prominent in Judaism as time goes along.
Are you suspecting my sarcasm that I'm trying to manipulate you?
In the divorce between Christianity and
that I'm
Judaism,
using tone, I'm lying. Can you tell I'm lying to you? I'm trying to cover my true feelings
and that's
to get the proper response I want from you. Can you tell that? Can you tell Daddy's really truly frustrated underneath
in the Jewish community
this lying voice?
After Dibbukim
Can you tell?
began to be reported. A Dibbuk, for people who may not be familiar, is a typically human soul that possesses another living human for various reasons, but it's still a harmful spirit.
Now,
it's not a demon in
spills
the
over.
classical sense.
That
it's not a fallen
negativity
angel,
from
it's a fallen
the
human
game
spirit.
spills over
But,
into real life. That is a trip.
You want a way to get rid of Dibbuks, and so exorcism had something of a revival after Dibbuks began being reported in the Kabbalistic community.
It's hate.
Oh, so that's question one.
It's hate,
question two, was it common to use a high-ranking demon to successfully manipulate an infernal hierarchical command structure to force lower demons out? No, not at the time of Jesus. And you can tell that by the answer he gives to this objection. He doesn't just say, if I cast out demons by Beelzebul, by whom do your sons cast them out? He also, and this is, if memory serves, is in both Matthew and Mark, he also says, a house divided against itself cannot stand.
Dude.
If Satan casts out Satan, then his kingdom is coming to an end.
It is.
And so the basic idea
it is, dude. It's an unhealthy hobby, bro.
the devil runs too
Too
tight a
much
ship.
time. The grind is
He's
too
not going
much.
to
You get
tolerate
frustrated. You take it out on your
demons
family.
fighting demons in his kingdom, because it would lead, if he did tolerate it, it would lead to civil war.
It makes you feel like shit about
in
yourself,
the demonic
dude.
community, and his kingdom would collapse, and he doesn't want that. So Satan does not drive out Satan. Demons don't drive out other demons. If they did, it would cause ruckuses and rivalries and big internal fights, and the devil's not stupid enough to
too quiet?
promote that kind of self-destructive behavior in his kingdom. So it is, even though later in church history, Christian history, you will find necromantic magic where you're saying things like, in the name of Satan, I'm binding you, you lower demon, to do X, Y, and Z. The evidence of the Gospels indicates that's not likely to be effective. Because it would imply pitting demonic force against demonic force. And I mean, the first thought I would have is, who says Satan's going to go along with you? You know, if you're invoking the name of Satan to bully some lower demon, what makes you think Satan's going to listen to you? Why isn't he just going to ignore you and do nothing to that lower demon and say, "Hey, good job, little buddy. You know, you go on possessing that person." And secondly, based on what Jesus tells us about how these situations work, the devil is not going to engage in demon versus demon conflict, because he's got a coalition he wants to keep together. He's not going to cause fractions in that coalition. And so it was not common certainly in Christian exorcism to try to bully lower ranking demons by invoking higher ranking demons. I can't say it didn't happen, but it was not common, and certainly not in the day of Jesus, because otherwise it would deprive his argument of all force. If it was a commonly accepted Jewish practice to say, "Oh yeah, this exorcist over here, he's using high-ranking demons to eject low-ranking demons," well, it would deprive Jesus' argument of its rhetorical force. And so the fact Jesus used this argument, and the fact that the evangelist preserved this argument for us to read about, means this was not a common practice, and so it makes sense for Jesus to use this argument. So it wasn't common in either Christian or Jewish exorcism at the time.
Thank you for that context, Jimmy. And I love the richness of that. And to your point that you just made a moment ago about how it was perhaps later on this might have evolved, this kind of just a quick follow-up, because one of the, I think he died in 1609, but Girolamo Menghi, this is the devil's word, you know, the Italian Renaissance, in his exorcisms before the 1614 rite was codified, they, exactly to your point, there are exorcisms saying, you know, Satan, bind this demon and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I guess exactly to your point.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. It's just later, as far as I know.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so do you think, this is a perfect question, especially someone for your theological opinion on this, is because you had later, as you said, exorcists who were doing this, and then he passed away, other exorcists did. Do you think that the reason why the 1614 rite needed to happen, and maybe one of the many reasons, was you maybe did have other exorcists doing things that were manipulating infernal command structures, and the church said, hold on, we need to have a codified, you know, homogenous structure here. Would that be somewhat fair, or what's your theological opinion?
Yeah, so the reason the 1614 rite came about was because of perceived problems with various rites of exorcism that were in use. It was not initially imposed across the Latin Church as a matter of you must use this rite. It eventually was mandated, but across the Latin rite. But originally it was presented as a model exorcism. And so you could still do other local exorcisms, but they needed to reflect the principles in the 1614 rite. And eventually they just said, okay, guys, just use the 1614 rite.
Man, you spending too much time.
Thank you, Jimmy, and listeners definitely appreciate that. And Jimmy, you're offering some really rich context that I think will help us inform as we look at history. And I love that distinction you make about at the time of Jesus versus those later evolutions that you shared about. Speaking of, one of the first questions on the podcast we were discussing, possession and exorcisms and simply strange phenomena. And to that point, Jimmy, we have another listener question for you from Twice and Thrice, which I always love the name.
So that adds up to 6?
Oh, yeah, I guess I suppose that would. So we have a question from 6 / Twice and Thrice. Yes, very good point. Who's saying, hello, Alex?
It's like on the old show, The Prisoner, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
There you go. It's
Who are you? I'm Twice and Thrice.
I'm Twice and Thrice. Obviously, what name do you know me by? Yes, that's awesome. So Twice and Thrice is asking to that point, saying, question for Jimmy. From a Catholic perspective, are all genuine possession cases automatically considered demonic, or could there be other non-human intelligences like archonic or reptilian capable of mimicking it? Twice and Thrice says, I ask because I once witnessed something with my very young child in the early witching hour that involved impossible physical contortions, multiple unknown languages, and an hour-long fixed gaze, but certain elements didn't match classic demonic cases I've studied. As of today, years later, he still sleepwalks and sleep talks in an endless variety of voices and languages, though he never leaves his room, and he now began experiencing very violent episodes of sleep paralysis. So Twice and Thrice is asking, Jimmy, would the church still treat this, or a case like this, as purely demonic, or might it consider another category altogether?
Okay, so we really have 2 questions here, so I'll back up and do the first one first, which is, from a Catholic perspective, are all genuine possession cases automatically considered demonic? The answer is, this is an area where we don't have a church teaching. So the answer is it's going to depend on who you ask. There are people who would say if someone's possessed, it's definitely a demon. There are other, and some of them are exorcists. There are other exorcists who would say, no, not necessarily. One of the things exorcists do run into is personalities in the course of the exorcism that claim to be a human being. Like they might claim to be Judas or Nero or someone like that. And then there's a question of, do you believe them or not? And the 1614 rite says, pay no attention to what they say. It's like, doesn't matter if they're saying they're human, get them out. But it also doesn't definitively settle the question one way or the other. And so I know there are exorcists who are happy to entertain the possibility that sometimes a wicked human, a damned soul, might possess a living person alongside of demons, let's say, or maybe even not alongside them. Also, I'm aware of a case of something, and these would effectively be dybbuks, just manifested in a Christian context. And I do plan a future mysterious world about dybbuks. But I'm also aware that that involuntary possession may involve more than that. There is, I think it's Alois Weisinger, who was a Cistercian abbot who was also a parapsychologist in the 20th century. It was either him or the British Jesuit Father Herbert Thurston, who was also a parapsychologist in the 20th century. But I think it was Weisinger, who records a case that occurred, I want to say in the 1930s in Italy, where a young girl who was, I think, a teenager, apparently became possessed by the spirit of a man who had been murdered. And what the spirit then did was give enough clues, enough information about how he had died and who had done it, that there could be justice done.
Nice piece of hoochie ass.
And then the mother of this girl said, okay, we've got the information now. I want you to get out of my daughter. And it just left. Okay, so this is not behavior that is characteristic of what demons normally do. They don't normally show up and try to give you data to solve a murder and then leave as soon as you ask them to. So this could suggest that this was not a damned soul or a demon, but a maybe a soul in purgatory or something like that, who is doing what it can to try to resolve business left over from life, which is a commonly reported thing that purgatorial souls do, is they try to find ways to resolve leftover business from life so that they can move on in the afterlife. So that would fit, that fact pattern would fit what a purgatorial soul might do if it had no other way of communicating with the living, but, I can use this girl to communicate. But it still involved involuntary possession, and it's just temporary and benign. There are other people who might say there are possibilities there. Then there's Mary the Arab, or Miriam the Arab, who was a nun that reported being in the, I want to say late 19th, early 20th century, who reported being possessed by a good angel. And so there are reports of not necessarily involuntary possession, but of possession involving good angels. So even though the answer to Twice and Thrice's first question is it's going to depend on who you ask, I don't have a way of restricting it to just demons. And so, in principle, I'm open to all of those options. And, unless someone can give me an argument for why some of them can't happen, I have to be open to, well, maybe they could. And therefore, I couldn't eliminate the possibility that there are other kinds of spirits that are neither angelic nor human that also might be involved. Now, I don't know what, and I don't know, I know what the archons were in Gnosticism. I'm not sure how Twice and Thrice is using that term. I would be skeptical of the archons in Gnosticism, and would say either they probably didn't exist, or because they contradict Christian teaching, or they're demons. She also mentions, I assume it's a she, mentions reptilian spirits, and I'm aware of claims about reptilian aliens. And if aliens exist and are living creatures, well, they're going to have souls too. And there might be reptilian aliens, but I don't have any evidence for them. But I can't rule them out in principle. Aquinas would say, based on Aristotle, every living creature has a soul. That's what makes it alive. And so if there are reptilian aliens, and I don't know that there are, but if there are, well, they would have reptilian spirits. And so I don't have any evidence of this, but I can't reject the possibility in principle. And there could be other kinds of spirits that God just hadn't told us about. And if they're positive spirits, they'd get classified as angels, given the way the term gets used these days, even if they're ones we've never heard of before. If they're harmful, they'd get classified as demons, even if we've never heard of them before. Or they could be kind of like us and are, neither 100% on team good or 100% on team bad. So all of those are possibilities. When it comes to Twice and Thrice's second question of would the church still treat this situation as purely demonic going on with the very young child who may not be quite so young anymore, would the church still treat this situation as purely demonic, or might it consider another category altogether? It definitely would consider other categories. Now, Twice and Thrice has said some stuff about what was going on with the child and what is going on with the child now, And although there are some similarities to the diagnostic criteria that are used in possession cases, there are also gaps in that of things that are not being mentioned that are also used to diagnose demonic possession. And we haven't even talked about natural things it could be. It could be a parasomnia. Twice and thrice mentions that the child has begun experiencing violent episodes of sleep paralysis. Okay, that's a parasomnia. That's a natural condition. Sleep paralysis is when there is a mismatch when you're waking up and your mind comes back online, but the brain module that paralyzes us when we're asleep so that we don't act out our dreams and endanger ourselves and others, that stays on. And so there's a mismatch. It's like I'm conscious, but I can't move, which is a very frightening experience and can feed night terrors and all kinds of things like that. Okay, well, if there's sleep, so that's a parasomnia right there. Twice and thrice also mentions sleepwalking. That's a second parasomnia, which is where the paralysis module fails to turn on. So we've got two parasomnias here that are natural conditions. Also, sleep talking is a parasomnia. We have multiple parasomnias here. And so I would say this may not be anything demonic or related to spirits at all. It could be that the child has something going on in the sleep centers of their brain that are producing these different effects. And in exorcism situations, the exorcist is required to investigate natural alternatives first before proceeding to do a major exorcism. And so if I were involved in this case, I'm not an exorcist, but because I'm not a priest, but I am a parapsychological investigator. I've been specially trained in how to investigate parapsychological cases. And if I was investigating this case, one of the things I would do is say, let's bring in a sleep specialist. Let's have the child spend some time in a sleep lab, being monitored, and see to what extent can the phenomena that are occurring, that are being reported, to what extent could they be explained and addressed naturally and medically before proceeding to say there must be a spirit involved here. This is standard procedure among this is standard procedure among competent paranormal investigators. When you look at a situation, you make a list of everything that could explain the phenomena that are being experienced, and then you go down that list, starting with the natural explanations. Yeah. And because normal explanations are more common than paranormal explanations. So if you can explain what's happening with just normal factors at work, you don't need to propose paranormal factors. Also, competent paranormal investigators generally find that even in cases where something paranormal is happening, usually there are some factors that are just normal, but have been misidentified as paranormal. Because once you think there's a ghost in my house, suddenly every bump in the night, oh, there's that ghost again. You start looking at everything through the lens that you are thinking about paranormally, but really it's like, no, it's just the air conditioning system causing stuff to vibrate at night. And so almost always there is, even in genuine cases of paranormal activity, there is some measure, maybe all of it, that is due to natural causes.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. And you know what? I'm checking the Patreon here since I had the initial question. I did talk to Twice and Thrice because I thought maybe medical support. Twice and Thrice says, this was a couple days ago, no medical support. Science is utterly lost in these matters. I've had well over 100. Apparently Twice and Thrice, not the child, has had well over 100 sleep paralysis episodes. And one of your other guests said it best. Whether I like it or not, the spirit world keeps showing up for me and for anyone who shares my home, which made me think of potential infestation or maybe another natural explanation, as you said.
It's possible, but if Twice and Thrice and the child both have parasomnias involving sleep paralysis, it could be an environmental factor. It could even be a genetic factor. But if it also happens to other people in the house, I would look for are there non-genetic factors that could be environmental that could result in sleep paralysis, like maybe some kind of mold is growing in the house that's causing parasomnias. And so anyway, I haven't consulted on this case, but so I can't address the case and say, here's what's going on. But the church would look at other options besides just the demonic. And actually, hopefully, something natural could be found, because if it's something natural, it may be possible to address it naturally.
Absolutely. And again, I appreciate that, Jimmy, because you're coming back to, as on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, faith and reason. And as someone engaged in the parapsychological, making a checklist of all the potential natural things, going through those first before you look at other things or considering them simultaneously. That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that context. And I know that Twice and Thrice will also very much appreciate it, as I do.
I hope it's helpful.
Yes, same.
And even even if it doesn't lead to a practical solution, it may be reassuring that maybe this isn't a demon. Maybe it's something else.
Right.
You write it down. It helps.
Few things are more scary than a demon has affected me and I can't do anything about it. Even if you can't do anything about it, maybe it's not a demon is a relieving thought.
100%. Yes. Here's certainly hoping. Absolutely. Speaking of, Jimmy, another theme that you've touched on here, which is, drawing on the rich tradition of the historical tradition, the medieval tradition, and offering your theological opinions. We have a listener question for you from Gabriel Shear. And Gabriel is asking and saying, perhaps the church and Western magicians face a similar dilemma in choosing which practices can adapt with the times and which should adhere to tradition. Stepping into that river of tradition is part of what makes working with grimoires so rich and beautiful. But are there practices, Gabriel's asking, we can and perhaps should adapt to our own time and place?
Well, speaking from a Catholic perspective, I would say that, yeah, there are practices from the past that need adaptation with time. What those are going to be is going to depend on a variety of different factors. But this is part of what the church does, and it's part of what the church's the technical word is its magisterium. Magister is Latin for teacher, so the church's magisterium is its teaching authority that Christ gave it. It's basically, for functional purposes, it's the bishop's teaching in union with the Pope. And the Catholic belief is they're given special guidance by God in sorting through both Scripture and tradition, which are the two sources of information, and they substantially overlap, but they're the two sources of information that the Church draws from for its faith. It's the job, ultimately, of the magisterium to help the faithful understand Scripture and tradition and as they apply to the faith, and that requires, and so there is a value to tradition that the Catholic Church acknowledges. At the same time, as the Church encounters new circumstances, like people propose new ideas, well, how does this new idea fit with Scripture and tradition? Do they imply this new idea, or is this new idea consistent with them, or have we learned something that would contradict this new idea? If it pertains to the faith, as opposed to, for example, being a matter of science, or purely history or something like that. But if it pertains to the faith, it's the Church's magisterium's job to sort out that question. And so there are adaptations that need to be made. That's why, for example, the 1998 rite of exorcism was made. That's why there is a revision to the 1614 rite. Now, today, both are allowed to be used, but there was a perceived need to make some further adaptations from the 1614 rite that were attempted to be made with the 1998 rite. So that's one illustration. Also, now I don't read grimoires generally, or for purposes of practicing what's in them. But, earlier I had the Ancient Christian Magic book, and I read that ritual for a good singing voice. Well, there's perfectly fine stuff in that. And so if Catholics today wanted to revive that ritual, if they want to use it officially, they're going to need to get official permission. But even if there are problematic elements in that, like there were some nomina magica in it that were unintelligible, and so I could see a bishop saying, this, all the theology here is good, but I don't like these nomina magica. So okay, we'll take those out. Well, that would be part of a discernment process for what's good here and what's not good here, and what can we adapt and what should we leave alone, or could we leave alone. And so I would say that's an example of the sorting the wheat from the chaff, to borrow a phrase from a rather well-known figure in the New Testament. Actually, that's John the Baptist. But I would say, apropos of Gabrielle's question, that similar principles are involved in both domains. And coming from a Catholic point of view, I would say, we should be unafraid to look at questions and make adaptations, but not make them with change in circumstances, but also not make them rashly. I think it was G.K. Chesterton, the British Catholic author, who had a saying that you should never tear down a fence until you've learned why the fence was built in the first place.
We stack them high, sir.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I love that with discernment and applying, again, faith and reason, but also in a Catholic context, definitely making sure to have things, if you want to consult your local ordinary, the bishop, making sure things are approved, but also using that discernment and showing fidelity to the teaching. That's wonderful, Jimmy. Thank you. And speaking of, I think it's a word going back, 1,000, 2,000 years when St. Augustine was writing about it, but the Goetia or Goetic. We have a Goetic question for you. A listener question from Frater Carcosa, who is asking and saying, as there are several of the Goetic legions...
By the way,
yes,
I like the name Frater Carcosa. So that means Frater is brother. So this is Brother Carcosa, and that ultimately comes from Ambrose Bierce, but it's made even more famous in The King in Yellow. So I get the literary reference, and I could ask Frater Carcosa to drop the mask and tell us who he really is, but he'd only respond by saying, "I'm not wearing a mask."
See, this is why.
And if you know The King in Yellow, you'll get that reference.
Yes, this is one of 85 reasons why I'm so loving this, Jimmy, because I can nerd out with you on this. The King in Yellow, allegedly, listeners, if you don't know exactly, this was written in the 1800s. The King in Yellow allegedly has, at the heart of it, a play. And all who read this play, almost like a chthonic version of Shakespeare's King Lear, whatever it is, go mad, and they lose all access to sanity.
Or have something bad happen to them. Yeah.
Or have something bad.
It's a cursed play. Yeah.
Yes. So, and saying I'm not wearing a mask, that I remember reading that the first time, and I was equally very, very chilled. So that is awesome, Jimmy. I absolutely love that. And so Frater Carcosa, wearing a mask or not, to confirm later, is asking and saying, as there are several of the Goetic legions, and I believe he's referencing here, Jimmy, a 1600s grimoire, the Lemegeton Clavicula Salomonis, or the Lesser Key of Solomon, in English in the 1600s, but it has roots going back to the 1300s. And he says, there are several Goetic spirits or legions that are known to grant prelacies, and he lists a few spirits. Is there any, Frater Carcosa is asking, is there any protocol in the Catholic Church to investigate or divine whether or not a person has gained their clerical rank via demonic infiltration? And Jimmy, let me just say, some people might not know what a prelacy is as well. So
it's a position of it's a privileged position in the Catholic Church. Prelacies, a prelate is a person who has been granted a particular type of position. Historically, they often carried incomes with them. Like people would tithe to the church or give donations to the church, and prelates would be given some fraction of that. So sometimes it was also called, these were financial considerations were also sometimes called benefices. And so one might say, hey, I'd like to
come get the
I'd like to have some
baby.
extra income, and I'd like to have the social prestige of being a prelate in the church. So maybe I'll conjure up. This will be a little type 3 necromancy. I'm going to conjure up one of these goetic legions and ask them to engineer things so that I end up getting appointed as a prelate. And I can have the prestige and the power and the money and all that kind of stuff. Well, today prelacies are much more modest in terms of money. I mean, you might get a living allowance or something, but it's not going to be fancy. But people still can have prestige and power, although that's not the purpose of the prelacy. But there is a certain amount of prestige associated with being a prelate, and a vain person could exploit that and crave that, even if, and in so doing, they would be violating Jesus's teaching that the greatest among you is the one who's going to be the servant of all. They would be pursuing this out of vainglory rather than genuine motives of service. So is there a protocol in the church to figure out whether someone has gained their clerical rank through demonic infiltration or influence? Well, the short answer is no. There is no right for, like, if you look here in the Book of Blessings, or if you look in the Sacramentary, which contains, or if you look in the rites, there is no right for, oh God, tell me if this guy used demons to get his current rank. So there isn't any right to do that, R-I-T-E. But there would be ways of investigating it. And there's not an established right for investigating it. But if I were contacted by a bishop or someone from the Vatican and they said, we have some reason to think that this guy may be doing demonic magic, and we've heard reports that it could have affected his career in some ways, how would you go about investigating this? I would be able to put together a program to work to investigate it. The program would be based on naturalistic principles of looking at and weighing evidence from that is objectively ascertainable. It would not involve directly consulting a spirit. But by interviewing humans and saying, what have you seen? What have you witnessed? Things like that. How did this person's career unfold? I could design a program that would enable one to get at this question. But it strikes me today that most high prelates in the church are probably not there due to practicing demonic magic. Not today. Maybe in the past. I would suspect this is a kind of danger whose day has probably passed. Today, the danger is more that the prelate has been influenced by the zeitgeist and is tempted to disbelieve in demons altogether rather than trying to invoke them for personal gain.
Again, thank you, Jimmy, for the nuance there, even though there's not a specific RITE, but potentially using the available information to build a program, I think is a fascinating thing. Thank you for sharing that. And since you just ended on this with, a time that has passed or sticking in the past, we have a question, a listener question for you from Jameson, and specifically talking about reading works through a Christian lens. And Jameson is asking and saying, quote, "Hey, Alex, excited to write in for the first time. So am I, Jameson. That's awesome. My question for Jimmy Akin is this. During the Renaissance, many priests looked to the works of so-called pagan prophets who seemed to foretell the coming and sacrifice of Jesus.
Like the Sibyls.
Like the Sibyls. There you go. Evaluating their works for other divinely inspired insights. One of these works was the Corpus Hermeticum of Hermes Trismegistus, whose ideas began to be incorporated into the Catholic faith for a short time, including the ascension of the Hermetic Pope, Alexander VI. And of course, Jimmy, feel free to weigh in on any of this.
Yeah, just quickly, her material from the Corpus Hermeticum was never incorporated into the Catholic faith. It may have been incorporated into Catholic theology among some authors, and I should clarify the distinction. The faith is official church teaching. It's what the church teaches. Theology is a matter of opinion. So if something's a matter in Catholic circles, if something's a matter of theology, that means it's an open, debatable opinion. But if it's something the church teaches, then it's understood authoritatively, it's understood as part of the faith. Material from the Corpus Hermeticum has never been something that the church has taught as this is true authoritatively. We're telling you this is true. There have been some authors who have incorporated ideas from Hermetic material into their theology or their practice, like maybe they want to do, Hermetic magic or something. But that's a matter of specific individuals, not here's what the church authoritatively teaches.
Excellent. Thank you for the clarification on that. And I think that's a great thing for, I know myself and all the listeners to keep in mind. And to that point, Jameson says that one of the works of Isaac Casaubon in 1614, the year 1614 again, one of his works, I am going to totally fail at this, De Rebus Sacris et Ecclesiasticis Excertationis, the 16, which sought to discredit the Corpus Hermetica as forgeries, was influential enough to make Hermeticism unpopular in this period of rediscovery and drove Hermetic thought underground, leading ultimately to the creation of the Rosicrucian order and eventually the now legendary Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. But Jameson says now that Casaubon's writings have been reevaluated by modern scholars to have significant errors, and the historical credibility of the text of the Corpus Hermeticum has been largely reestablished, do you, Jimmy, believe that the Catholic magician or the Catholic Church at large should take a second look at this important metaphysical source material? And then secondly, how would you recommend reading pagan metaphysical works through a Christian lens? Thank you.
Okay, so we have a few related questions here. The first one is, I'll mention, I've done some check-in on Pope Alexander VI, who Jameson mentions, and I have been unable to establish any firm connection between Alexander VI and Hermeticism. So it appears, at least based on the reading that I've done, the idea of him as a Hermetic Pope may be based on an urban legend, because the material I've run into has said, no, there's no connection here. But also Isaac Casaubon was a Calvinist. He was not a Catholic, and he was trying to attack the Catholic Church in part by criticizing the idea that there were any possibility of, pagan non-Christian prophets pointing towards Jesus and so forth. So he didn't want, he wanted to say all this pagan stuff is evil. We shouldn't learn about it. We shouldn't do anything about it. And this stuff is all fake. And there has been something of a reassessment of Casaubon's work. I'm not an expert on this, although I'd point folks who are interested, and Jameson actually mentions this in the question. Justin Sledge on his Esoterica channel has a good video on this, and I would recommend that. Casaubon basically he had a very short critique, it was only like 17 pages long, of the Hermetic literature, which is large,
okay, baby, watch your
and was
hand.
even larger in antiquity.
I'm ready for you.
And he made some points that have stood up. There are, for example, various uses of language in the Hermetic literature, which allegedly is based on Egyptian, but it clearly is based on Greek, and so it has anachronistic material in them. It cannot be as early as was originally claimed. And one of the things that Casaubon's arguments that has stuck is the idea this information, this material is not as old as claimed. Now, Hermes Trismegistus, or Hermes the Thrice Great, is a legendary figure, allegedly from Egypt. He's sometimes linked to the Egyptian god Thoth, who was a god of magic, and the Greek god Hermes, hence the name Hermes Trismegistus. And there's a problem in pinning down when did Hermes Trismegistus, if he was a historical figure, when did he really live? Obviously, Thoth, is kind of hard to document him in history. We can document when people believed in him, but it's harder to document, was there ever a figure that corresponded to the ibis-headed Thoth, even if he was, even if you do a reductionistic thing to mythology and say, oh, there must have been some human that inspired this myth, which actually was a strategy that was used for dealing with mythology in the ancient world. That you had ancient authors who would say, oh yeah, the gods were originally just people that legends grew up around. But even if that were true for Hermes and Thoth, we don't know when they lived. There are other claims that date Hermes to be in a contemporary of Moses. So Moses lived about 1200 BC. And Casaubon is right about this, the language in the Hermetic literature does not date from 1200 BC. It actually dates from the Christian era, and a lot of it does. And modern scholarly estimates place the composition of the Hermetic corpus between about 300 BC and 300 AD. And so that's just to give a kind of general scholarly perspective on this. But Casaubon has been judged wrong about other things he claimed. To get to Jameson's questions, though, do I believe that the Catholic magician or the Catholic Church at large should take a second look at this important metaphysical source material? Well, I can't speak to what a Catholic magician should do, or any magician. Because magic itself is a practice that, depending on how you understand it, is going to be problematic. But what should the Catholic Church do? I would say let scholarship proceed to try to sort out this issue. Just like the Catholic Church, the Catholic Church doesn't have an official position on, let's say, the Sibylline oracles or the Nag Hammadi texts or the Dead Sea Scrolls. It lets scholars who are experts in these various fields, many of whom are Catholic, explore and try to sort these matters out. And the faith doesn't have any need to be threatened by that. So I would say the Catholic Church at large should let scholarship proceed to examine the Corpus Hermeticum as just like any other ancient source, and see what can be learned about it, what's true about it, what's false about it, and eventually it can be enriching to Catholics like other Christians and other modern people, whether they're people of faith or not, to, be enriched by a knowledge of the past and have an accurate understanding of, okay, so when did these ideas enter human history, and are there elements here that are good, and are there elements here that we need to be wary of, and just take an open-minded but critically discerning perspective on them. So that's what I'd say to the first question. Jameson also says, how would I recommend reading pagan metaphysical works from a Christian lens? Well, it's not going to be the same for everybody. Some people are going to have a temptation towards paganism that as a Christian, I would disagree with and say you should stay away from it if you're one of these people who has a special temptation to paganism. Just like if you had a special temptation to worship demons, you shouldn't be studying exorcistic texts. And so if someone has a temptation to embrace ideas or practices that are mistaken based on an affective, meaning emotional attraction to paganism or demons or whatever it may be, I would say stay away from it. On the other hand, there are other people who don't have that and who can study these materials safely, and who may even have a reason to study them. You know, I've got my books on magic, right? Some of them right here, physical copies of them. And I understanding how ancient Egyptians thought about it, or how Christians have done practices that some have classified as magical. You know, I think I've illustrated in this very podcast how my knowledge of this can be put to good use. The precondition for me studying these things, though, is having a good understanding of the Catholic faith. So I would say anybody who's going to read pagan works, and, you know, St. Paul did that. I mean, he even quotes, both in the book of Acts and in his own letters, St. Paul quotes from pagan sources. And he was definitely a Christian, but he still knew his pagan literature. Well, the people today can too. You just need to be well grounded in the Christian faith, whether it's the Catholic understanding, if you're a Catholic, or some other understanding, if you're a different type of Christian. You need to know your own faith well before you start trying to encounter other perspectives. And then that knowledge of your own faith will give you the ability to discern, okay, here's this thing this pagan source is saying. To what degree is that compatible with what I believe? You know, just like St. Paul did. He found things that Greek poets had written that a Christian can believe that, but he found other things that they would say that, you know, a Christian can't believe that. So in studying pagan metaphysical works or other works from a Christian lens, I would say the first thing is know the Christian faith, particularly your own version of the Christian faith, know it well, so that you've got an early warning system that you can rely on when you're encountering other points of view, whether they're pagan or anything else.
Faith and reason, coming back to, I know those core principles for you, Jimmy, with your podcast and with all of your work. And I that's such a rejuvenating perspective. So thank you for sharing that and elaborating on Jameson's question. And to that very point, Jimmy, we have a few listener questions talking about the Catholic Church views on the supernatural and on demons. And to that point, we have a listener question for you from Alex Wolf, who is asking and saying, my question for Jimmy is, the Catholic Church views demons in a very specific way. That is, leading us from sin and God, tempting us, deceptive in their helpfulness, etc. Conversely, those who practice goetic magic and utilize grimoires have reported helpful and fulfilling encounters with spirits/demons, but also absolutely terrifying encounters, of course. So Alex is saying, Jimmy, does the Catholic Church view these positive, quote unquote, interactions as simply deceit, or can demons be capable of these more transactional encounters without damning the summoner or taking advantage of them? Thanks so much.
Okay, so I'm going to quote the song Slime Creatures from Outer Space by Weird Al Yankovic. He's singing about how the slime creatures from outer space have invaded Earth and they're causing problems for everybody. Let me get the exact lyrics so I can quote the context. Slime creatures from outer space, lyrics.
While you're pulling that up, that is awesome. I love it.
I don't. So he's singing and he says, they'll rip your head off just for fun. They'll paralyze your mind. They're wearing out their welcome. I don't think I like their kind. They'll suck your brain out through a straw. You just can't trust those guys. Okay, that's true not only of slime creatures from outer space, but of demons who are lying liars who lie. They are working for the father of lies. And so you just can't trust those guys. Sometimes they're going to tell you the truth. Sometimes they're going to act nice to you and do things you want them to. But fundamentally, you just can't trust those guys. And they're like the monkey's paw from the famous story, The Monkey's Paw. Anything you ask them, in the end, it's going to go bad. It may go good for a while, but in the end, it's going to go bad. And so I would say, if you're really dealing with a demon, don't deal with a demon.
You wouldn't play, would you?
Now, I mentioned there's like Miriam the Arab, who apparently, according to some reports, was possessed by an angel. Or there was like the Christian Dybbuk in Italy I mentioned, where it appeared to be a purgatorial soul who just wanted help solving his murder. Okay, that's a different situation. Here we had evidence that maybe we're not dealing with a demon. But if you are dealing with a demon, I would say from a Christian point of view, do not trust them and have as little to do with them as possible. Because fundamentally, they may be nice to you for a while, but that's not how things are going to end with them. They're going to try to take advantage of you at some point. Demons are like groomers. They will groom you for a while to get you into a position where they can take advantage of you, and then they're going to take advantage of you.
That's Frozen.
It's a powerful, cautious story about the
with the snowman,
very high risks of dealing in that area. Thank you, Jimmy, for sharing that. And
with the horn, the big horn.
We also have something you've written about for years, and I always think of your book, Teaching with Authority. But we have another listener question for you.
I don't know.
From Andrew Nikolai, and Andrew is asking and saying, Jimmy, I've always heard that the Vatican is sitting on a treasure trove of grimoires, the largest collection in the world, allegedly. Is this true or just occult folklore?
Well, okay, hang on. Let me get the episode number, because I know I have an episode.
So beautiful. So pretty.
Touches on this. Okay, it's episode 147, which you can get to by going to mysterious.fm/147. And that principle works for all of the episodes of Mysterious World. If you know the episode number, you just go to mysterious.fm/that episode number. But that episode is what historically, or at least for the last few centuries, was called the Vatican Secret Archives. Today, it's known, they changed the name, and today it's known because secret used to just mean private. So it was the Vatican Private Archives, but then secret is like, forbidden knowledge, and it acquired a new meaning in many modern languages. So they changed its name to the Vatican Apostolic Archives. It's a library, and it has a lot of historical material in it, some of it going back centuries. But it's not secret in the sense people think. If you are, I've been to the Vatican website and looked up the application form for how do you get access to the Apostolic Archive, and basically they want to know, are you a historian who's pursuing a genuine historical task? You could demonstrate you're a historian by working as a historian at a university or by documenting that you're working on some historical research project. But basically they want to know, are you a historian? And they don't care what your religion is. You could be a Christian historian, you could be a pagan historian, you could be a Jewish historian, you could be an atheist historian. They don't care. What they want to know is, are you a historian, before they let you start handling historical materials. They don't want you getting Cheetos all over, Cheeto crumbs all over the letter from Henry VIII. They want to know that you're responsible and how you're going to handle these materials. But once you do that, once you fill out the application, you say, here's what I'm working on, here's the materials I want, here are my historical credentials. It's like, yeah, come on over. We'll have the librarians pull them up for you. I don't know, do they have a big collection of grimoires, because I've never asked that question. My suspicion, because they do have material going back quite a ways, is they may have some, but I would be skeptical of the idea that they have the largest collection in the world. The reason I say that is because there was, for a number of centuries, an institution known as the Index of Forbidden Books, which were books that contained material that was regarded as inconsistent or dangerous, at least, for Christians to be exposed to. And this did include some grimoires. So I would not be surprised that, oh yeah, for those dangerous things, we wanted to keep a file copy. You know, so I wouldn't be surprised if they had some, but they haven't gone super out of their way to like, oh, let's collect them all, got to get them all. You know, I would suspect some private individual who has a collector habit and a fascination with them might well have more, or some university somewhere or something. So I would suspect they have some, but I would at least question the idea that they have the largest collection in the world.
Excellent. Thank you, Jimmy. That's great. I remember I would often ask scholars who come on the podcast, you know, in my head, I think, oh, you have a new Latin manuscript. You probably bribed some priest in the Vatican to sneak you through the catacombs at midnight. And they're like, yeah, I actually just spend like a lot of time in a library with specific Latin translation dictionaries, you know. So I think it goes to your point that there's always different ways to try and get access to
yes. Oh, and by the way, just for historical information, the Index of Prohibited Books does not exist anymore. It was abolished in the 1960s, so that's not a current activity the church is still doing.
Ah, very good. Okay. Thank you. Again, listeners, I hope you're taking notes as well, because this is just incredibly fruitful.
I don't know. Jimmy, there might be
we have some 5 more listener questions or so, and then a few of mine at the end if we have time. The next listener question, I'm not sure if he's wearing a mask or not as well, but it's also from Frater Carcosa.
Oh, nice to hear from him again.
Yes, and Frater Carcosa is asking and saying, quote, given that mystics have throughout history have had or been able to cause visions of saints, Joan of Arc, Teresa of Avila come to mind, the prevalence of Marian apparitions and the ability of the magician to evoke spirits to visible appearance, given all of that, Frater Carcosa says, could a person intentionally cause a vision or apparition? And if so, how could the Blessed Virgin be called to appear?
Okay, so one can ask any saint you want to appear. I mean, I could say, hey, Blessed Virgin Mary, could you appear to me today? Well, she could if she chooses and God wills, you know, but she hasn't done that. I haven't really been in the habit of asking her to do that, but I could. And so I suspect that unless she has some special message for me, Jimmy Aiken, she might not do that. I might just make a request and it wouldn't go anywhere. Because I'm not all that special. On the other hand, there are mystics who have apparently relationships with God that are different. He wants to use them to accomplish certain things in the world, and you know, if when they ask the Virgin Mary to appear, you know, they get they get frequent flyer miles or something. You know, it's more likely that their request is going to be granted than mine. So I don't think what happens is that mystics are able to compel Mary or the saints or angels or demons to appear. I don't think that is a power humans have. But they may have a relationship with, you know, let's say Mystic X has a really special relationship with Mary. They have a very strong Marian devotion. They have great faith that, you know, Mary would appear to them. They're open to doing whatever Mary wants in the world, and Mary has something they can do in the world. So if they ask for Mary to appear to them, Mary well might do that in a greater way than Mary might for me.
Really.
I mean, I have a Marian devotion, but I know others have a stronger Marian devotion than I do. You know, nobody has the same devotion to every saint. I think that various mystics and others have been able to invite saints to appear, and in some cases they may have a special relationship where that request is more successful. But I don't think that mystics have been able to compel an appearance. One of the principles that is discussed in the New Testament is we need to subject everything to God's will. And so we shouldn't just expect that any of our prayers are going to be responded to in the way we want. We need to be, we're not the ones in charge. We don't see the big picture. It may be like God could say, yeah, I could, do what you want, but then that's going to trigger the Third World War. And I care about all those people who, too. And so I'm afraid I have to say no to your request. Well, okay, God sees the big picture. I don't. So it's like, okay, you know best. Here's my request. I'd really appreciate it if you could do this for me, but I understand if it's not the best thing.
Come on, stay close.
And so, it's all subject to God's will. And so I guess, without repeating myself too much further, I guess that's what I'd have to say on that question.
Yeah, no, this is great. And I think this gets to a final question from Frater Carcosa. We do have a few others. And I think this might go to your earlier point, Jimmy.
A few other questions from others, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so earlier when you were chatting about and you were sharing about authority, regarding exorcism and things like that, Frater Carcosa says, quote, Jimmy, is there an inherent power in apostolic succession that would make it advantageous for the magician to gain said succession, or does it only confer institutional legitimacy rather than a variety of spiritual, magical, or occult power? As an extension, in your opinion, Jimmy, why was or is apostolic succession valued by the Ecclesia Gnostica Catholica and other Gnostic, Neo-Gnostic, and occult churches?
Well, I never like speaking for other people. So in regard to the Ecclesia Gnostica Catholica and other neo-Gnostic and occult churches, I'm afraid you'd have to ask them. I could speculate, but I never like it when people speculate about my motives. And
I gotta go. I gotta
go. The golden rule of treat your neighbor the way you want to be treated. I don't want to speculate about their motives.
Come on, man, keep up.
In terms of, is there an inherent power in apostolic succession that would make it advantageous for the magician to gain said succession, or does it only confer institutional legitimacy rather than any variety of spiritual, magical, or occult power? We kind of have several factors occurring in conjunction here. The authority that apostolic succession, which is what bishops have, they're all ordained in a succession that goes back to the apostles, by virtue of their consecration as bishops. That's something that has more than an institutional legitimacy. It actually conveys sacramental power. Now, bishops can,
that triangle,
by virtue of their consecration, it conveys several things, but one of them that it conveys is the power to confect all of the sacraments. So they can say the Eucharist in a way that some of these are then shared with priests. So they can consecrate the Eucharist so that it really becomes the body and blood of Christ. As a layman, I can't do that. They share this also with regular priests, they can sacramentally absolve someone in confession. I can't do that. They can ordain people as priests and deacons. I, as a layperson, I can't do that. So they do have spiritual power.
Come on, please radio off.
Please radio off. Please radio off. In terms of the way Frater Carcosa has phrased the question, could you call that magical or occult? Well, per the definition that I've given of magic as something that's an unapproved rite, well, if someone's a fundamentalist Protestant snake handler, they're going to look at those Catholic rites and say they're magic.
Algorithm trainer.
So from their
like
perspective,
a weight machine,
it would be magical. From my perspective, it's just a religious rite.
Calm down.
Is it occult? Well, again, a lot of
like that?
Snake handlers are not known for being particularly Catholic, and many of them don't even know the meaning of the word occult, which just means hidden. But since the spiritual effects of the sacraments are invisible, oh yeah, those Catholic rituals, they're all occult. So they might call it that, but as a Catholic, I would have this is what God has ordained for us. This is the way we're supposed to do things, and so it's all wholesome.
Just walk slowly.
So there is an inherent power that is conveyed by apostolic succession.
Go ahead, bro.
I can't speak to the particular churches that you name and what their motive would be for trying to acquire apostolic succession. But if one has a wholesome motive for wanting to, be ordained, whether as a priest or as some other kind of minister of Christ's church, well, then it's a noble cause to pursue. On the other hand, having bad motives and pursuing the same office can be a problem. We see an example of that in Acts chapter 8, where the Samaritans have been evangelized by Philip the evangelist, not Philip the apostle. And since he's not an apostle, he can baptize them because anybody can baptize anybody, in principle, under standard Christian thought. You don't have to be a Christian to baptize someone. An atheist can baptize you. Because baptism is the gateway to the Christian life, and so it needs to be as freely available as possible. So on a Catholic understanding, anybody can baptize you. Now, you want it to be a priest, but it doesn't have to be. Okay, so Philip the evangelist, he's an evangelist. He's not one of the 12, but he's an evangelist, so he evangelizes the Samaritans, who were kind of half Jewish people who didn't get along with regular Jews and vice versa. And so he evangelizes them, he preaches the gospel of Christ to them, they embrace the faith, and Philip baptizes them. But he can't give them the next sacrament of Christian initiation, which is confirmation. And so they call to Jerusalem. I mean, they didn't have a phone back then, but they send word to Jerusalem and say, hey, we've got all these new Samaritan Christians.
Dude.
They've been baptized, but they haven't been confirmed yet.
Why my body won't do what I want it to?
Qualified to lay hands
don't know
on
why
them
it does that
and
sometimes.
confirm them in the Christian faith and give them the next sacrament of Christian initiation. And so Jerusalem says, oh, cool, Samaritan Christians? Awesome. Let's have Peter and John go down. And so Peter and John come down from Jerusalem, and they lay hands on the Samaritans, and they confirm them, and they start to experience mystical phenomena. They start speaking in tongues or other similar, supernatural phenomena.
I got to do something.
Well, one of the guys that converted was a magician. He was Simon, known as Simon Magus, or Simon the Magician. And he had amazed people for all kinds of time with his magic practices. But he's like, okay, this Christianity thing, I'm on board with that. I want to be a Christian, and he gets baptized. And then he sees Peter and John come down from Jerusalem, and they're laying hands on people, and their mystical phenomena is happening. And he thinks, wow, this is cool. A man could make a buck off that. So he goes to Peter and John and says, if you give me the ability to confirm people like this, I'll pay you. And this does not get the response that he's hoping for. And Peter says, you're thinking you can buy the gift of God for money. It's like, that's not going to work. God is not on board with that. This is a spiritual thing we're doing. It should not be reduced to an economic transaction.
Come on, guys.
And you need to pray that God will forgive you for this proposal. And he initially does. Now, there are some later stories about him from the 2nd and 3rd century that say, unfortunately, he later went off the rails again. But those are later stories. I don't know how much weight to attribute to them. But because the way it ends in Acts,
right, let's go wake up your brother.
And I like to think he stayed on the right path. Even though I don't have
that's not how you wake
there
him
are
up.
these later stories. But so if you're pursuing ordination as, oh, I can impress people with this, or some other unworthy motive, well, then it's not going to go so well for you. But if you are pursuing ordination because you want to serve other people and help them spiritually, then that's a noble goal. And if you're the right person for the job, you can pursue that, and that'll be great. You can serve God in that way.
That's excellent. Again, that's wonderful context. And I said we can't let an episode discussing esotericism go by without bringing up Simon Magus. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Jimmy. And also speaking of, the menagerie of different expertises that you have and areas of interest, when it comes to faith and reason, we have a great question for you from Joe. And she's saying, hi, Alex, my question for Jimmy. My skepticism often means I try to find the logical explanation, quote unquote, for things, which I find annoying. I'm particularly interested in NDEs, near-death experiences. And Joe's asking, Jimmy, are there any common logical explanations that people come up with for NDEs, which Jimmy can provide arguments against, please? Thank you so much.
Okay. The first thing I'd note is just a terminological point, which is Joe is using the term logical as a synonym for naturalistic or materialistic. And I would say that's a natural thing based on how people use language to do. But I would also caution against it, because you can be logical and propose an explanation for something that is not naturalistic or materialistic. Sometimes logic may point to the spiritual or the paranormal. So I wouldn't treat logical as a synonym for a purely naturalistic explanation. Moving on from the terminological point, I've done lots of research on survival. This is one of the three major. It would depend on how you count it. It's one of the two major study areas in parapsychology. The other is the function of psychic abilities. But psychic abilities and the survival of bodily death are the two major subject areas that parapsychology covers. And I have a special interest in survival. And it's not just personal, but intellectual. I have an interest in survival and what science can say about bodily death. So I've done actually quite a number of episodes of Mysterious World that deal with various survival-related factors, including near-death experiences and deathbed visions and after-death communications and all kinds of stuff like that. So you can check those out if you're interested. In terms of naturalistic explanations or materialistic explanations for NDEs, there are a variety that have been proposed, and they all have problems. Some of them are proposals like you have data contamination. So after in recent years, people have heard enough about near-death experiences that they could fake them or imagine them. Like even to illustrate the point of just how much it's penetrated pop culture, there's an episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine where Miles O'Brien and Julian Bashir, the station's engineer and doctor, have made mental contact with the person who's dying, and that person is trying to trick them into thinking they're dying too. And the way the dying person is trying to trick them is they're sitting down together in this corridor, and they're watching the corridor being eaten away behind them. And as the oblivion barrier is coming towards them, they're saying like, "Oh wow, I guess that's the tunnel that everyone talks about," and then they realize actually this is all just a trick. But the fact they would do this in a Star Trek episode, they would allude to the tunnel that many people report seeing at the end of their lives, shows just how much different aspects of near-death experiences have penetrated the popular mind. And that means that enough information is out there that you have to be careful about could someone be faking this or could they be imagining it based on what they've heard about this experience. You know, it's like, oh, my heart stopped and I want to believe I had experiences. And, you know, the idea of not having experiences is scary. So maybe I just imagined this. Okay, so that's a possible naturalistic explanation. Or maybe I want a book and movie deal, you know, and that's happened too. There are a number of books about near-death experiences that are fraudulent. And like there was one, I want to say it's The Boy Who Came Back from Heaven. It may not be that one, but it's one particular book is based on a child who allegedly had a near-death experience and then talked about it in a book. There are others. Daniel Brinkley was a figure who very plausibly was a fraud, even though he claimed near-death experiences. There was another called Embraced by the Light by a woman named Betty Eady, that there's evidence that was a fraud. So some people, for money, motives like money, you know, they'll fake an experience. And anytime someone bases an entire book about a single experience or one person's experience, that automatically I throw it out because there's a significant chance they faked it in order to get the book deal. Because normally near-death experiences are brief enough you could maybe get a chapter out of it, but you're not getting a whole book out of a typical near-death experience. So this is not what normally happens in a near-death experience. It's an atypical experience. Even if it's real, it's an atypical experience that is not commonly reported, and it represents outlier data that should be excluded from consideration unless it's confirmed by multiple other sources. So both because of the risk of fraud and because of the fact this is eccentric outlier data, it should be set aside. And that applies anytime I find an entire book based on one person's NDE. Whether I suspect them of fraud or not, it's just outlier data. So those are possibilities, but the problem is they don't apply to everybody. There are people who do not know what the commonly reported phenomena are, and these have not just been reported recently. The term near-death experience was introduced in the 1975 book by Raymond Moody, Life After Life. And he was that was the first book to popularly draw attention to this. And subsequently, in examining the historical record, we found earlier NDEs that described the same phenomena, even though they were not popularly known. And so that's a sign that it can't just all be imagination or fake based on the distribution of this knowledge throughout society. It can't all be that. And there are people in other countries today where this is not commonly known, and they report the same kind of thing. In fact, there are some interesting statistical patterns that are both similar to and different from what Americans report. There's a famous book, I want to say it's called At the Threshold of Death or something like that, by a couple of researchers. It looked at near-death experiences in the English-speaking world and in India. And it looked at how they're both similar and different. One of the things is that, so there are psychopomps, people who guide you into the afterlife, and so you're having your NDE, or maybe you're still on your deathbed. And this happens in both deathbed visions and near-death experiences. But you as you're dying, or whether it's an NDE or a DBV, you're dying and someone shows up, or several someones show up and say, "Hi, we're here to guide you into the afterlife." Sometimes it's a relative. Sometimes it's an angel, or that's what we call them here in the West. We call them angels. But That's not a word in Hindi. In India, they personify death as the god Yama. And Yama has servants known as Yamduts. And so what they will say is, yeah, sometimes it's a relative who shows up to help you into the afterlife, or sometimes it's a Yamdut. But it's clearly the same phenomenon. They're just, what we use the term angel for, Indians who are not Christian, I mean, those Indians who are not Christian and don't have the concept of angel, they say it was a Yamdut who came to bring me into the afterlife. So, and you know, based on various educational factors, now this may be changing, but historically they haven't known as much about NDEs as we've known in the West, because the phenomenon was discovered in the West and began to be written about in the West. Then, so those are some explanations that have been proposed. Most of the other explanations, other than fraud and imagination, are connected with the dying brain. And the idea is that as the brain shuts down, it causes some or all of the experiences that are reported in NDEs. For example, a British skeptic named Susan Blackmore proposed that as the brain dies, the visual cortex in the brain shuts down in such a way that it becomes progressively darker, and that was her explanation for the tunnel that people often report seeing. Okay, so first problem. All of the dying brain proposals are entirely speculative. There is no proof that any of them are correct. And there's a good reason for that, which is it is unethical to kill people to do scientific studies on them. So they can't be researched in any standard way. Now, maybe in the future we'll have brain reading technology that'll allow us to establish closer correlations. You know, maybe we can watch what the person is seeing as their visual cortex shuts down and see, is there correlation? But right now we can't do that. So all of the dying brain proposals are entirely speculation. There is no proof of any of them. Also, there are instances where there's disconfirmation. Like there was a proposal that as part of the dying brain hypothesis that it may be because people are being given drugs that are going to generate in the hospital to try to save their lives, that are going to generate these experiences that induce hallucinations. Except what they found is the people who got the drugs tended to be the ones who didn't have memories of NDEs. So there's a negative correlation between the experiences and the drugs. And the proposal from the NDE side is, yeah, you're doping people full of drugs that are designed to make them forget. You don't want people remembering their heart being restarted by electrical shocks. So yeah, they give people Versed and other drugs that are going to interfere with memory formation. So of course, the ones who got those drugs, they're going to remember less.
Doing it for life, huh?
But there is a very powerful counter argument to all of the dying brain theories or proposals, and that is
I was trying to move it really slowly.
Vertical information. Vertical is a term of art that's used sometimes in philosophy, but it's also used in parapsychology. What vertical information is, now you can hear how it sounds like the word verified. And so it's connected with truth or veritas.
I'm trying, dude. I'm trying. It's giving me fucking anxiety, dude.
True. But that's only one condition you need for vertical information. You also need the information to be beyond random chance. It's not something that could be guessed. And it needs, as a third condition for vertical information, it needs to be something you had no natural way of knowing. So if it's information you had no natural way of knowing, it goes beyond what you could guess, and it turns out to be true anyway, then that's vertical information. Well, here's the thing. Lots of near-death experiences involve vertical information. I'll give you an example. This is an example from, I believe, the 1970s. A woman named Maria was a migrant worker from Mexico. She was working in the Pacific Northwest, and she went into cardiac arrest. And they took her to the hospital, and they started working on her to get her heart restarted, and they got her heart restarted. And so she wakes up, and she's talking a mile a minute in Spanish. And at the time, because this is the 70s, there were not a lot of Spanish speakers working in American hospitals in the Pacific Northwest. So they find one worker at the hospital who knows some Spanish. And she goes in to talk to Maria. And Maria says, I just had this amazing experience. While my heart was stopped, I was floating above myself, looking down at what the doctors and nurses were doing to me. And I could see them working and on me and so forth. And then I started moving around in the hospital. And I went to other rooms and other floors. And on an upper floor of the hospital, I went out on the ledge outside the windows. And I found a blue men's tennis shoe that had scuff marks and a lace wrapped around it. And it was just one men's blue tennis shoe with scuff marks and lace wrapped around it. I don't know what just happened to me. I would love to know what happened. Could you at least check and see if there's such a shoe? So the hospital worker checks, and she starts going around and going into, looking at outside the windows. And on an upper floor, on the ledge outside the window, she finds a single men's blue tennis shoe with scuff marks and the lace wrapped around it. Okay, this information, Maria had no natural way of knowing. They brought her into the hospital at night at ground level. It was dark, and this is on an upper floor, and she was unconscious when they brought her in because she was experiencing cardiac arrest. So no natural way of knowing it, and it goes way beyond random chance. You would not guess that such an object would be on a ledge on an upper floor of this hospital. And it turned out to be true anyway. And this is, Maria's shoe is only one example of a near-death experience that has vertical information. There are loads of them. In fact, there is a book which I would recommend. Let me get you the author's name. The name of the book is The Self Does Not Die, and it is by Titus Rivas, R-I-V-A-S, as well as several other authors. And it is, the current edition of it has 128 cases of near-death experiences with vertical information that have been verified by medical personnel. So this is not just cases with vertical information, it's cases with vertical information and some form of verification by medical personnel. So it's not just somebody saying, oh, I saw this and I had no way of knowing it. And there are, and it's over 100, it's basically 130 in this one volume. And some of them are really interesting. There's like one guy who, his heart stops. He has an out-of-body experience as part of his NDE, and he sees the doctors. He's floating up above. He sees the doctors working on him, and there's this one Japanese doctor who's there. This guy's an American, and he's having this experience in America. But there's this one Japanese doctor who he sees flapping his arms like a chicken. And when they get his heart restarted, he's asking about that and saying, what is the doctor doing, flapping his arms like a chicken? And it so turns out that this Japanese doctor, who he'd never met before, had the habit to keep his hands sterile of pointing with his elbows to different things in the surgical theater. And so that's what he had seen. But again, it's something you wouldn't guess, didn't have a natural way of knowing because he was unconscious, and it turned out to be true. So all of these vertical information scenarios indicate that a naturalistic or materialistic dying brain scenario is not going to explain what's happening in these experiences. Now, you could still propose it's psychic functioning, and someone is retrieving this either before they die or after they get revived. But then why are they interpreting it as an experience that they saw in real time while their heart was stopped? So I think the survival explanation is still the best explanation, even if you open the door to psychic functioning. I think the survival explanation is still the superior one. But those are some considerations I would bring to bear on this subject, and I hope that's helpful.
Oh, that is, Jimmy, that's wonderful. Joe, I don't know about you, but I've been taking a ton of notes, vertical information, the different phases. Thank you, Jimmy, because I feel, and I'm sure Joe does too, much more equipped in case there is somebody with radical skepticism, if you will, coming and saying, well, what about this? What about that? And even citing those instances is just such a wonderful thing. And listeners, check the links below in the video and podcast description for the episodes of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where you can get even more information about the work that you've done. That's wonderful, Jimmy. Well, we have two more listener questions and then just a few of my own, only if we have time. So the first listener, or the second to last listener question is from Ana Victoria Esquivel, and she is asking and saying, why, Jimmy, is God so quiet in a world where other spirits are so loud? Demons, ghosts, poltergeists, etc. But where is God? Why is he not waving to us? He has always been such a silent figure to me, despite having tried to seek him. So any information or advice or anything on that?
Well, as you point out, this is a subcase of the problem of divine hiddenness. And that divine hiddenness is itself a subcase of the problem of evil. So evil comes in two kinds. This is how philosophers and theologians use the term. There is moral evil, which is what we otherwise call sin. And then there's physical evil, which is anything that's bad that's not moral evil. So it includes physical suffering like pain, but it also includes emotional suffering, like why don't I have rosy feelings? Why doesn't God make himself obvious to me when I want him to? Okay, well, you're experiencing a form of suffering. It's not physical suffering, but it's a form of suffering, and that means it's a form of natural evil. So the Catholic Church has a general answer to the problem of evil. And the answer, this is in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the general answer to the problem of evil in all its forms is that God would not permit any evil to exist unless except for the fact he's going to bring about an equal or greater good as a result of it. Now, he's not going to just abandon us to evil. He will eventually make everything right, and even if it's not in this life, he's going to make everything right, and things will be better for us having tolerated the evil, even though we're not denying this was an evil and we did experience it, but things will be better. In some cases, we can figure out what good it is that God is enabling by allowing an evil. And because we can even do this in our own lives. An example I commonly use is, let's suppose you're a little kid and your parents take you to the doctor to get your childhood vaccinations. And, some people are skeptical of childhood vaccinations, and that's a whole other subject. But let's suppose for the moment they work, or at least your parents think they work. Okay, well, if your parents are right that childhood vaccinations or certain childhood vaccinations work, then they bring you into the doctor to get this vaccination because it's going to spare you getting a horrible disease later on. But what's happening to you at the moment? At the moment, you're having evil happen to you. That shot's going to hurt. And furthermore, you're a little kid. Your parents who you love and trust, who are supposed to take care of you, have brought you to this place. It smells strange. It's cold. There are strangers, and they're going to stick a metal object in my arm. What? That's going to hurt. It's terrifying for the child. And yet, parents will commonly do this because they recognize that it's better to spare the child the long-term suffering of some terrible illness than the momentary discomfort of getting the shot. And pick whatever. I know some people are skeptical of some vaccines, and okay, partition those. Don't worry about those. Pick one that does work. And it can be rational for parents to allow their child to experience a small amount of suffering in order to protect the child and thus provide a greater good for the child. Well, if we can do that with our children, God can do that with us. And so that's the general answer to why does God allow any evil? It's because he's going to bring about a greater good. Now, a child who's, say, 1 or 2 years old does not have the ability to figure out what the parents are doing, not when they're super young. Similarly, we in this life are not always able to figure out what is God doing by allowing this particular evil. So, but what we can do is recognize the principle that we use with our children and how God can use the same principle with us. So even though we can't, in many cases, say specifically in this life, here's what God is promoting by doing it this way, we can at least trust him and say, I love God, and God is love. He loves me, and I can trust him. And even if I don't know the reason he's allowing this evil, I can trust that he'll still make it worth my and everybody else's while. Also, I would say different people are different. So that's kind of the general answer to the problem of evil, including the evil of why does God seem hidden to me much of the time. But he's part of it also may be what you're open to. Jesus, it says in the Gospels, in certain towns he didn't do many miracles because people weren't open to him. Well, okay, if you've got a super skeptical point of view that's not open, and I'm not saying that Anna Victoria does, but I can imagine some people, it's like, they kind of have a chip on their shoulder with respect to God. It's like, I don't really believe in you, God, but if you're there, I dare you to show yourself to me. It's like, okay, well, this person is acting up. If you have a snot-nosed kid in high school saying to the teacher, I don't believe you, but I dare you to prove this thing to me, it's like, okay, you know who doesn't deserve my time? It's anyone who takes an attitude like that. In fact, I got an email this was a couple of weeks ago, I guess, but I had an email saying, here's this issue I'm interested in. I bet you won't even answer. And so I emailed back and said, well, you're wrong about that latter point, but the kind of person who takes that kind of hostile attitude is exactly the kind of person who I don't think deserves my time to type them an answer. And so it's like, I'm happy to answer people's questions if I can, but if you're going to, I dare you to answer, I bet you won't. Well, okay, you just qualified yourself as not worth my time trying to answer given that hostile attitude. Well, God may take the same approach. If he's got people who are hostile towards him and closed, and like I said, I'm not saying Anna is like this, but I can imagine there being people who God may say, okay, I'll give you what you need in the end, but I'm not going to go out of my way to make a miracle for you. I've given you enough. Also, but if you're more open to God existing and manifesting himself, you may get more results. Or you may get results out of the blue as just a gift. There are people who say, I was walking down the street the other day and wham, I had a mystical experience that I totally wasn't expecting. I didn't do anything to provoke it, but suddenly I had 60 seconds where I perceived all of the joy and harmony in the universe in a way that transcends anything I'd ever experienced before. This was not just, I felt happy. This was, I am experiencing everything in nature as profoundly meaningful and connected and loving for like 60 seconds, and then it vanished. And so there are people who have stronger experiences like that. I would love to have that kind of experience. Thus far, it hadn't been God's choice for me to have that, and I'm okay with that. If he chooses someday to give me a mystical experience like that, I would be very grateful. But I also have what I need. And so I even if there have been times in life that were challenging to me, he's always given me what I need, even if it's like the Rolling Stones song. You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you'll find you get what you need. And he's always given me what I need, even if it's not always what I want.
Oh, that's excellent, Jimmy. Thank you. And yeah, keeping an open mind. And I know Anna, she's exactly very open-minded, and so I appreciate that context as well, because again, it's simply about seeing things from a different facet, a different perspective. So thank you for that. And this last listener question is also from Anna. And she's saying, quote, I often hear from Catholic sources that spirits cannot be trusted, that they are often demons who don't have our best interests at heart, which we've spoken about, Jimmy, as well. At the same time, Anna says, I reflect on parts of church history, such as the power struggles of the medieval era, the severe punishments of the Inquisition, and even recent scandals involving clergy abuse. Given these difficult realities, how can we reconcile the Catholic Church's historical and modern failings with the idea that it wants to be a beacon of light and guide people to a path that's good for them when so much of that trust has been fractured?
Well, so I guess we have a couple of issues at work in this question. The first one is, Anna says, I often hear from Catholic sources that spirits cannot be trusted, and they are often demons who do not have our best interest at heart. I agree, there are Catholics who say that.
It's sucking me in, baby.
Some of them
are
well-known popular exorcists who ought to know better.
I'm not sure what I should do.
Because the New Testament does not expect us to systematically mistrust spirits.
Can't just run in circles.
In fact, Catholic tradition doesn't expect us to systematically mistrust spirits. If the Virgin Mary appears to you and you've got evidence it's the Virgin Mary, you ought to trust her. Similarly, if you have a purgatorial spirit, or what historically Catholics have identified ghosts as, you want to help the ghost. You don't want to distrust it. You want to say prayers for it, or have mass said, or, help it resolve business from this life, like maybe find its murderer. Well, okay, you don't need to systematically distrust that. There are angels who show up and give people apparitions and prophecies about the future and stuff. The New Testament even gives us tests for is this a good angel or a bad angel? How can we figure that out? And fundamentally, the overall principle is articulated in 1 John 4, if you want to look it up. John says, do not trust every spirit, but instead test the spirits and see whether they're from God.
Hey, bud, it's time to wake up!
St. Paul picks up on this same principle in 1 Corinthians 12. Both John and Paul articulate different examples of it, but they're articulating a common principle of, is what the Spirit telling you consistent with what God has already revealed? If the Spirit is telling you something that is consistent with what God has previously revealed, then you're enabled to trust the Spirit, at least provisionally. Now, if it later starts contradicting what God has said, well, then you need to stop trusting it. But you're at least provisionally qualified to trust it if it's what it says is consistent with what God has revealed. On the other hand, if it's not consistent with what God has previously revealed, you should distrust it from the get-go. So notice what John says. He doesn't say, don't trust any spirit. He says, don't trust every spirit. So the attitude John is counseling is not run away and stick your fingers in your ears and go, la, 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 every time a spirit shows up. You can talk to them. You need to talk to them to test them and find out which team are they playing for. So, we should take an open but critical and discerning attitude towards spirits. Therefore, we should not systematically distrust them. We should only distrust spirits, or I put it this way, we should distrust spirits when they give signs of distrustworthiness, like they're telling us some message that disagrees with what God has revealed, or they're telling us stuff that even if it doesn't contradict what God has revealed, they tell you, hey, the stock market's going to go up tomorrow, and it doesn't. So you don't want to bet a lot of money on what an unreliable spirit is telling you, whether they're unreliable about what the stock market's going to do or whether they're unreliable about what God has revealed. So that's, I guess, what I would say to the first question is we don't need to be skeptical of every spirit. We should be open and discerning to the spirits that we interact with. And the New Testament expects us to interact with spirits. Otherwise, there's no point in including this in the text of 1 John. So that's kind of the first factor that's at work in this question. The second is, the second question I think is actually, if I understand it correctly, which I may not, but if I understand it correctly, it's actually a separate question, which is how do we reconcile the church's desire to be a spiritual force for good in the world and help people with the fact that there have been notable lapses where the church failed to achieve that goal? And I would say a couple of things. The first one is, I think that's everybody.
That's for baby.
Almost everybody wants to do good in the world, and yet they don't always succeed in that. So I would say, well, the church is an institution that's composed of living humans, and at least in this life, humans often have good intentions. They want to help people, but they don't always deliver. Sometimes some humans do bad stuff, and that's as true of the church as it is every other institution. You look at the government. Well, the government theoretically is a force for good and wants to help people and wants to order society in a way that's beneficial to everybody, and it doesn't always work out that way. So I would say that in principle, this is true of every institution, and on a micro scale, it's true of every person. We always want to do more to help people, unless we're sociopaths. We want to do more to help people than we end up fulfilling. So I would say I'd look at the church in the same light. So that's the first thing that I'd say. The second thing that I would say is we do have evidence that God is using the church to do good on balance. It is not always, it's not like every priest or every bishop or every theologian or every Catholic apologist is always doing the right thing. But that doesn't mean that God isn't genuinely using the church as one of his instruments. And so, and we can see that in microcosm, even in the first century. St. Paul, he had sharp elbows. He could be irritable. And you read his write-ins. I mean, like read the last few chapters in 2 Corinthians. After starting off with, "Hey, I'm so happy, it's all so great," someone arrives and gives Paul some bad news, and he has a meltdown in the last few chapters of 2 Corinthians. He just totally goes into meltdown mode and is really negative. So, okay, he had some flaws. You know who else did? St. Peter, the first pope. He's like, "Oh, if everyone else betrays you, I'll die with you." And dude, before the cock crows twice, you're going to deny me 3 times. And he did. And so the very first pope was a flawed individual. And yet God still used him. He even goes on to write 2 infallible encyclicals that are right there in your New Testament. They're called 1 Peter and 2 Peter. Despite his human flaws, God could still use him as an individual. Something St. Paul acknowledged. Paul said, "God's using me for the Gentiles. He's using Peter for the Jews." So, even if you're flawed, or even if your institution is flawed, like every institution is, including the Catholic Church, God can still use it. And I think there is evidence. Now, this is not an apologetic show, so, we've been going on for some time, so I don't want to go too deep into it, but I think there is evidence that God uses the Christian community and the Catholic Church specifically to do good in the world. It's, I could go through that in more detail, but that's what I'd say is a matter of principle.
Thank you, Jimmy. That's wonderful. And I think, again, it's key information that challenges. I know myself, and I think this whole conversation has been inviting, rather, listeners to think about things in a different way. Well, Jimmy, these are great themes that you've been touching on, so many different threads, and I very, very much appreciate the generosity of your time. But a very important question, too, which is a last question. We will, of course, Jimmy, link to your Patreon page. Listeners.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Listeners, I support Jimmy Akin on Patreon. Check out the links below. It'll be the first link you see because Jimmy has wonderful content you can get early access to. You can get other content. So check out Jimmy's Patreon. It's wonderful to support creators and Catholic theologians like Jimmy. So Jimmy, of course, will make sure to link to that. But in addition to this, just seeing your show, seeing your Patreon, seeing all of the material, all the writings, the videos, you're always working on something. I'd like to know when you sleep, but also, can you give us a hint on some upcoming books, episodes, projects, or any big issues that you're constantly thinking about?
Well, okay, so I guess you asked about books first, so I'll answer that first. My next scheduled book is going to be an apology. That is a term of art. It means a defense. But it's going to be a book arguing for the Christian faith and specifically for the Catholic understanding of the Christian faith. But it's going to start in a very dramatic way, and it's going to incorporate material I've never seen other apologists use. I'm going to incorporate parapsychology into my argument for the Christian faith. So we're going to start the book with Maria's shoe and explain, and this would give us evidence for an afterlife, and if there's an afterlife, maybe you want to have a good one. So what else can we figure out about the afterlife? And ultimately, I'll make an argument for the Christian faith and for the Catholic understanding of the Christian faith and show people arguments that support that. So that's the next apologetic book I have planned. I also have, I mentioned I just did a debate with an atheist on the resurrection of Christ. And as part of reviewing material for that, I reviewed a script that I had written, and the script has actually been filmed, but it hadn't been published in a few years. But it's on evidence for Christ. So I review all kinds of different Jewish documents about the Messiah and what the Messiah does in different conceptions. And then I review what evidence do we have that Jesus existed? What evidence do we have that he rose from the dead? What evidence do we have about him fulfilling messianic prophecy? And I realized this is a 65,000 word book. I could publish this just changing the word lesson to chapter. And so I'm going to contact the people at my publisher and say, hey, you want this extra one? I could even give it to you before the general apology. So those are religiously themed books that I have coming up. I also have a parapsychology book that I have not written, but I have the notes for it. There are different explanations for what are known in parapsychology as cases of the reincarnation type, or court, which are one explanation, which is like the explanation used in Hinduism, is there's something you could call a soul that gets reborn from one person into another. There are also other theories, though. In Buddhism, there is no eternal self. There's no eternal soul. And so they compare reincarnation to one candle lighting another. And so I call these residue theories. It's like there's some kind of residue that passes from one person to another. And so you have the soul theories, you have the residue theories. Then when parapsychologists came along, they said, could psychic functioning explain cases of reincarnation type? And some people have proposed yes. And there are, if you look in the existing literature, and by the way, if you want to hear more about this theory, I did a 2-part look at modern reincarnation research on Mysterious World. I can tell you the episode numbers. It's not the earlier series, it's the recent one I did. It's episode 275 and 276. But if you look in the existing literature, most of the proposals in this area, the psychic theories, as opposed to the soul theories or the residue theories, the psychic theories tend to involve proposals of psychic function and operated in really complex or powerful ways, which are known as super psi. But I realized you don't need complex psi. All you need is a psychic link between a present person and a previous person. And all the information that is supportive of the idea that one might otherwise get that this person has lived before, it just flows through that link. So my proposal is the single source psychic link, which involves simple psychic functioning. And it turns out there's an evolutionary reason, or a set of evolutionary reasons, why this might develop. And it explains some facts in court cases better than the soul theories or the residue theories. So I'm planning on writing a book, and I mentioned this in those 2 episodes of Mysterious World, that eventually I need to write a book to publish this. So I'm planning on writing a book where I explore the different possible explanations for court and specifically focus on the single source psychic link theory and why it has advantages that other competing theories don't have in terms of the data. Also, for Mysterious World, I plan on doing a series of episodes that continue to engage with magical subjects and demonic subjects. I am definitely going to be doing an episode, at least one, on the medieval clerical necromantic underground or underworld. I'm also going to be doing something on the modern equivalent of that, because there is a modern equivalent of the clerical necromantic underworld. It doesn't take exactly the same form, but it uses the same principle. And I'm also going to be doing some studies of specific exorcism cases, and they will, among other things, demonstrate that demons are lying liars who lie, and you should never believe them.
So many things to keep our ear to the ground on: single source psychic links, evolutionary reasons for that, modern clerical necromancy, and of course, an incredibly powerful advice there about never to trust the demonic, and they are lying liars who lie. But also exploring esotericism with nuance and evaluating with both faith and reason, and the wonderful areas, everything in between. Catholic theologian, parapsychologist, author, philosopher, and the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Jimmy Akin, Jimmy, thank you so much for taking the time, so generous with your time and your expertise, and coming on the podcast today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I look forward to next time.
And that's part 2 of Jimmy's 2-part interview on the podcast Glitch Bottle.